Chapter 31, Part B of The Monastery by Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 31, Part B. "No, Allan," replied the prisoner, "this is no vain question devised by dreaming scholiasts, on which they may whet their intellectual faculties until the very metal be wasted away. The errors which I combat are like those fiends which are only cast out by fasting and prayer. Alas! not many wise, not many learned, are chosen. The cottage and the hamlet shall in our days bear witness against the schools and their disciples. Thy very wisdom, which is foolishness, hath made thee, as the Greeks of old, hold as foolishness that which is the only true wisdom." "This," said the Sub-Prior, sternly, "is the mere cant of ignorant enthusiasm, which appealeth from learning and from authority, from the sure guidance of that lamp which God hath afforded us in the councils and in the fathers of the Church, to a rash, self-willed, and arbitrary interpretation of the Scriptures, rested according to the private opinion of each speculating heretic." "I disdain to reply to the charge," replied Warden. "The question at issue between your Church and mine is, whether we will be judged by the Holy Scriptures, or by the devices and decisions of men not less subject to error than ourselves, and who have defaced our holy religion with vain devices, reared up idols of stone and wood, in form of those who, when they lived, were but sinful creatures, to share the worship due only to the Creator, established a toll house betwixt heaven and hell, that profitable purgatory of which the Pope keeps the keys, like an iniquitous judge commutes punishment for bribes, and—" "Silence, blasphemer," said the Sub-Prior sternly, "or I will have thy blatant obloquy stopped with a gag." "Ay," replied Warden, "such is the freedom of the Christian conference to which Rome's priests so kindly invite us. The gag, the rack, the axe, is the ratio ultima Romae. But know thou, mine ancient friend, that the character of thy former companion is not so changed by age, but that he still dares to endure for the cause of truth all that thy proud hierarchy shall dare to inflict." "Of that," said the monk, "I nothing doubt. Thou wert ever a lion to turn against the spear of the hunter, not a stag to be dismayed at the sound of his bugle." He walked through the room in silence. "Well, Wood," he said at length, "we can no longer be friends. Our faith, our hope, our anchor on futurity, is no longer the same. Deep is my sorrow that thou speakest truth. May God so judge me," said the reformer, "as I would buy the conversion of a soul like thine with my dearest heart's blood." "To thee, and with better reason, do I return the wish," replied the Sub-Prior. "It is such an arm as thine that should defend the bulwarks of the Church, and it is now directing the battering ram against them, and rendering practicable the breach through which all that is greedy, and all that is base, and all that is mutable and hot-headed in this innovating age, already hope to advance to destruction and to spoil. But since such is our fate, that we can no longer fight side by side as friends, let us at least act as generous enemies. You cannot have forgotten, O gran bonta Dei cavalieri antiqui, erano nemesi eran de fede diversa. Although perhaps," he added, stopping short in his quotation, "your new faith forbids you to reserve a place in your memory even for what high poets have recorded of loyal faith and generous sentiment." "The faith of Buchanan," replied the preacher, "the faith of Buchanan and of Beza cannot be unfriendly to literature, but the poet you have quoted affords strains fitter for a dissolute court than for a convent." "I might retort on your Theodore Beza," said the Sub-Prior, smiling, "but I hate the judgment that, like the flesh fly, skims over whatever is sound, to detect and settle upon some spot which is tainted. But to the purpose. If I conduct thee or send thee a prisoner to St. Mary's, thou art to-night a tenant of the dungeon, to-morrow a burden to the gibbet tree. If I were to let thee go hence at large, I were thereby wronging the Holy Church, and breaking mine own solemn vow. Other resolutions may be adopted in the capital, or better times may speedily ensue. Wilt thou remain a true prisoner upon thy parole, rescue or no rescue, as is the phrase amongst the warriors of this country? Wilt thou solemnly promise that thou wilt do so, and at my summons thou wilt present thyself before the Abbot and chapter at St. Mary's, and that thou wilt not stir from this house above a quarter of a mile in any direction. Wilt thou, I say, engage me thy word for this? And such is the sure trust which I repose in thy good faith, that thou shalt remain here unharmed and unsecured, a prisoner at large, subject only to appear before our court when called upon." The preacher paused. "I am unwilling," he said, "to fetter my native liberty by any self-adopted engagement. But I am already in your power, and you may bind me to my answer. By such promise, to abide within a certain limit, and to appear when called upon, I renounce not any liberty which I at present possess, and am free to exercise. But on the contrary, being in bonds and at your mercy, I acquire thereby a liberty which I at present possess not. I will therefore accept thy proffer, as what is courteously offered on thy part, and may be honourably accepted on mine." "Stay yet," said the Sub Prior, "one important part of thy engagement is forgotten. Thou art farther to promise, that while thus left at liberty, thou wilt not preach or teach, directly or indirectly, any of those pestilent heresies by which so many souls have been in this our day won over from the kingdom of light to the kingdom of darkness." "There we break off our treaty," said Warden, firmly. "Woe unto me if I preach not the gospel." The Sub Prior's countenance became clouded, and he again paced the apartment, and muttered, "A plague upon the self-willed fool!" then stopped short in his walk, and proceeded in his argument. "Why, by thine own reasoning, Henry, thy refusal here is but peevish obstinacy. It is in my power to place you where your preaching can reach no human ear. In promising, therefore, to abstain from it, you grant nothing which you have it in your power to refuse." "I know not that," replied Henry Warden. "Thou mayest, indeed, cast me into a dungeon. But can I foretell that my master hath not task work for me to perform even in that dreary mansion? The chains of saints have, ere now, been the means of breaking the bonds of Satan. In a prison, holy Paul found the jailer whom he brought to believe the word of salvation, he and all his house." "Nay," said the Sub Prior, in a tone betwixt anger and scorn, "if you match yourself with the blessed apostle, it were time we had done. Prepare to endure what thy folly, as well as thy heresy, deserves. Bind him, soldier." With proud submission to his fate, and regarding the Sub Prior with something which almost amounted to a smile of superiority, the preacher placed his arms so that the bonds could be again fastened round him. "Spare me not," he said to Christie, for even that ruffian hesitated to draw the cord straitly. The Sub Prior, meanwhile, looked at him from under his cowl, which he had drawn over his head, and partly over his face, as if he wished to shade his own emotions. They were those of a huntsman within point-blank shot of a noble stag, who was yet too much struck with his majesty of front and of antler to take aim at him. They were those of a fowler, who, levelling his gun at a magnificent eagle, is yet reluctant to use his advantage when he sees the noble sovereign of the birds pruning himself in proud defiance of whatever may be attempted against him. The heart of the Sub Prior, bigoted as he was, relented, and he doubted if he ought to purchase, by a rigorous discharge of what he deemed his duty, the remorse he might afterwards feel for the death of one so nobly independent in thought and character, the friend, besides, of his own happiest years, during which they had side by side striven in the noble race of knowledge, and indulged their intervals of repose in lighter studies of classical and general letters. The Sub Prior's hand pressed his half o'ershadowed cheek, and his eye, more completely obscured, was bent on the ground, as if to hide the workings of his relenting nature. "Were but Edward safe from the infection," he thought to himself, "Edward, whose eager and enthusiastic mind presses forward in the chase of all that hath even the shadow of knowledge, I might trust this enthusiast with the women, after due caution to them that they cannot without guilt attend to his reveries." As the Sub Prior revolved these thoughts, and delayed the definitive order which was to determine the fate of the prisoner, a sudden noise at the entrance of the tower diverted his attention for an instant, and, his cheek and brow inflamed with all the glow of heat and determination, Edward Glendinning rushed into the room. Chapter 31. Chapter 32 of the Monastery by Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 32. Then in my gown of sober grey along the mountain path I'll wander, and wind my solitary way to the sad shrine that courts me yonder. There, in the calm monastic shade, all injuries may be forgiven, and there for thee, obdurate maid, my orisons shall rise to heaven. The Cruel Lady of the Mountains. The first words which Edward uttered were, "My brother is safe, reverend father, he is safe, thank God, and lives. There is not in Corrinanshian a grave nor a vestige of a grave. The turf around the fountain has neither been disturbed by pickaxe, spade, nor mattock, since the deer's hair first sprang there. He lives as surely as I live." The earnestness of the youth, the vivacity with which he looked and moved, the springy step, outstretched hand, and ardent eye, reminded Henry Warden of Halbert, so lately his guide. The brothers had indeed a strong family resemblance, though Halbert was far more athletic and active in his person, taller and better knit in the limbs, and though Edward had, on ordinary occasions, a look of more habitual acuteness and more profound reflection, the preacher was interested as well as the Sub-Prior. "Of whom do you speak, my son?" he said in a tone as unconcerned as if his own fate had not been at the same instant trembling in the balance, and as if a dungeon and death did not appear to be his instant doom. "Of whom, I say, speak you? If of a youth somewhat older than you seem to be, brown-haired, open-featured, taller and stronger than you appear, yet having much of the same air and of the same tone of voice, if such a one is the brother whom you seek, it may be I can tell you news of him." "Speak then, for heaven's sake," said Edward. "Life or death lies on thy tongue." The Sub-Prior joined eagerly in the same request, and without waiting to be urged, the preacher gave so minute an account of the circumstances under which he met the elder Glendinning, with so exact a description of his person, that there remained no doubt as to his identity. When he mentioned that Halbert Glendinning had conducted him to a dell in which they found the grass bloody, and a grave newly closed, and told how the youth accused himself of the slaughter of Sir Piercie Shafton, the Sub-Prior looked on Edward with astonishment. "Didst thou not say, even now," he said, "that there was no vestige of a grave in that spot?" "No more vestige of the earth having been removed, than if the turf had grown there since the days of Adam," replied Edward Glendinning. "It is true," he added, "that the adjacent grass was trampled and bloody." "These are delusions of the enemy," said the Sub-Prior, crossing himself. "Christian men may no longer doubt of it." "But an it be so," said Warden, "Christian men might better guard themselves by the sword of prayer than by the idle form of a cabalistical spell." "The badge of our salvation," said the Sub-Prior, "cannot be so termed. The sign of the cross disarmeth all evil spirits." "Ay," answered Henry Warden, apt and armed for controversy, "but it should be borne in the heart, not scored with the fingers in the air. That very impassive air, through which your hand passes, shall as soon bear the imprint of your action, as the external action shall avail the fond bigot who substitutes vain motions of the body, idle genuflections, and signs of the cross, for the living and heart-born duties of faith and good works." "I pity thee," said the Sub-Prior, as actively ready for polemics as himself, "I pity thee, Henry, and reply not to thee. Thou mayest as well winnow forth and measure the ocean with a sieve, as mete out the power of holy words, deeds, and signs by the erring gauge of thine own reason." "Not by mine own reason would I meet them," said Warden, "but by his holy word, that unfading and unerring lamp of our paths, compared to which human reason is but as a glimmering and fading taper, and your boasted tradition only a misleading wildfire. Show me your scripture warrant for ascribing virtue to such vain signs and motions." "I offered thee a fair field of debate," said the Sub-Prior, "which thou didst refuse. I will not at present resume the controversy." "Were these my last accents," said the reformer, "and were they uttered at the stake, half choked with smoke, and as the faggots kindled into a blaze around me, with that last utterance I would testify against the superstitious devices of Rome." The Sub-Prior suppressed with pain the controversial answer which arose to his lips, and turning to Edward Glendinning, he said, there could be now no doubt that his mother ought presently to be informed that her son lived. "I told you that 2 hours since," said Christie of the Clinthill, "and you would have believed me. But it seems you are more willing to take the word of an old grey sorner, whose life has been spent in pattering heresy, than mine, though I never rode a foray in my life without duly saying my paternoster." "Go then," said Father Eustace to Edward, "let thy sorrowing mother know that her son is restored to her from the grave, like the child of the widow of Zarephath. At the intercession," he added, looking at Henry Warden, "of the blessed saint whom I invoked in his behalf." "Deceived thyself," said Warden instantly, "thou art a deceiver of others. It was no dead man, no creature of clay, whom the blessed Tishbite invoked, when, stung by the reproach of the Shunammite woman, he prayed that her son's soul might come into him again." "It was by his intercession, however," repeated the Sub Prior; "for what says the Vulgate? Thus it is written, Et exaudivit Dominus vocem Heli, et reversa est anima pueri intra cum et revixit. And thinkest thou the intercession of a glorified saint is more feeble than when he walks on earth shrouded in a tabernacle of clay, and seeing but with the eye of flesh?" During this controversy, Edward Glendinning appeared restless and impatient, agitated by some internal feeling, but whether of joy, grief, or expectation, his countenance did not expressly declare. He took now the unusual freedom to break in upon the discourse of the Sub Prior, who, notwithstanding his resolution to the contrary, was obviously kindling in the spirit of controversy, which Edward diverted by conjuring his reverence to allow him to speak a few words with him in private. "Remove the prisoner," said the Sub Prior to Christie. "Look to him carefully that he escape not, but for thy life do him no injury." His commands being obeyed, Edward and the monk were left alone, when the Sub Prior thus addressed him: "What hath come over thee, Edward, that thy eye kindles so wildly, and thy cheek is thus changing from scarlet to pale? Why didst thou break in so hastily and unadvisedly upon the argument with which I was prostrating yonder heretic? And wherefore dost thou not tell thy mother that her son is restored to her by the intercession, as Holy Church well warrants us to believe, of blessed Saint Benedict, the patron of our order? For if ever my prayers were put forth to him with zeal, it hath been in behalf of this house, and thine eyes have seen the result. Go tell it to thy mother." "I must tell her then," said Edward, "that if she has regained one son, another is lost to her." "What meanest thou, Edward? What language is this?" said the Sub Prior. "Father," said the youth, kneeling down to him, "my sin and my shame shall be told thee, and thou shalt witness my penance with thine own eyes." "I comprehend thee not," said the Sub Prior. "What canst thou have done to deserve such self-accusation? Hast thou too listened," he added, knitting his brows, "to the demon of heresy, ever most effectual tempter of those who, like yonder unhappy man, are distinguished by their love of knowledge?" "I am guiltless in that matter," answered Glendinning, "nor have presumed to think otherwise than thou, my kind father, hast taught me, and than the Church allows." "And what is it then, my son," said the Sub Prior kindly, "which thus afflicts thy conscience? Speak it to me, that I may answer thee in the words of comfort. For the Church's mercy is great to those obedient children who doubt not her power." "My confession will require her mercy," replied Edward. "My brother Halbert, so kind, so brave, so gentle, who spoke not, thought not, acted not but in love to me, whose hand had aided me in every difficulty, whose eye watched over me like the eagle's over her nestlings, when they proved their first flight from the eyrie, this brother, so kind, so gently affectionate, I heard of his sudden, his bloody, his violent death, and I rejoiced. I heard of his unexpected restoration, and I sorrowed." "Edward," said the father, "thou art beside thyself. What could urge thee to such odious ingratitude? In your hurry of spirits, you have mistaken the confused tenor of your feelings. Go, my son, pray and compose thy mind. We will speak of this another time." "No, father, no," said Edward vehemently, "now or never. I will find the means to tame this rebellious heart of mine, or I will tear it out of my bosom. Mistake its passions? No, father, grief can ill be mistaken for joy. All wept, all shrieked around me, my mother, the menials, she too, the cause of my crime, all wept, and I I could hardly disguise my brutal and insane joy under the appearance of revenge. Brother, I said, I cannot give thee tears, but I will give thee blood. Yes, father, as I counted hour after hour, while I kept watch upon the English prisoner, and said, I am an hour nearer to hope and to happiness. I understand thee not, Edward, said the monk, nor can I conceive in what way thy brother's supposed murder should have affected thee with such unnatural joy. Surely the sordid desire to succeed him in his small possessions. Perish the paltry trash, said Edward, with the same emotion. No, father, it was rivalry. It was jealous rage. It was the love of Mary Avenel that rendered me the unnatural wretch I confess myself. Of Mary Avenel, said the priest, of a lady so high above either of you in name and in rank? How dared Halbert, how dared you, to presume to lift your eye to her, but in honour and respect, as a superior of another degree from yours? When did love wait for the sanction of heraldry? Replied Edward. And in what but a line of dead ancestors was Mary, our mother's guest and foster child, different from us, with whom she was brought up? Enough, we loved, we both loved her. But the passion of Halbert was requited. He knew it not, he saw it not, but I was sharper-eyed. I saw that even when I was more approved, Halbert was more beloved. With me she would sit for hours at our common task with the cold simplicity and indifference of a sister, but with Halbert she trusted not herself. She changed colour, she was fluttered when he approached her, and when he left her she was sad, pensive, and solitary. I bore all this. I saw my rival's advancing progress in her affections. I bore it, father, and yet I hated him not. I could not hate him. And well for thee that thou didst not, said the father. Wild and headstrong as thou art, wouldst thou hate thy brother for partaking in thine own folly? Father, replied Edward, the world esteems thee wise, and holds thy knowledge of mankind high. But thy question shows that thou hast never loved. It was by an effort that I saved myself from hating my kind and affectionate brother, who, all unsuspicious of my rivalry, was perpetually loading me with kindness. Nay, there were moods of my mind in which I could return that kindness for a time with energetic enthusiasm. Never did I feel this so strongly as on the night which parted us. But I could not help rejoicing when he was swept from my path, could not help sorrowing when he was again restored to be a stumbling block in my paths. May God be gracious to thee, my son, said the monk. This is an awful state of mind. Even in such evil mood did the first murderer rise up against his brother, because Abel's was the more acceptable sacrifice. I will wrestle with the demon which has haunted me, father, replied the youth firmly. I will wrestle with him, and I will subdue him. But first I must remove from the scenes which are to follow here. I cannot endure that I should see Mary Avenel's eyes again flash with joy at the restoration of her lover. It were a sight to make indeed a second Cain of me. My fierce, turbid, and transitory joy discharged itself in a thirst to commit homicide, and how can I estimate the frenzy of my despair? Madman, said the Sub-Prior, at what dreadful crime does thy fury drive? My lot is determined, father, said Edward in a resolute tone. I will embrace the spiritual state which you have so oft recommended. It is my purpose to return with you to St. Mary's, and, with the permission of the Holy Virgin and of St. Benedict, to offer my profession to the Abbot. Not now, my son, said the Sub-Prior, not in this distemperature of mind. The wise and good accept not gifts which are made in heat of blood, and which may be after repented of. And shall we make our offerings to wisdom and to goodness itself with less of solemn resolution and deep devotion of mind than is necessary to make them acceptable to our own frail companions in this valley of darkness? This I say to thee, my son, not as meaning to deter thee from the good path thou art now inclined to prefer, but that thou mayest make thy vocation and thine election sure. There are actions, father, returned Edward, which brook no delay, and this is one. It must be done this very now, or it may never be done. Let me go with you. Let me not behold the return of Halbert into this house. Shame, and the sense of the injustice I have already done him, will join with these dreadful passions which urge me to do him yet farther wrong. Let me then go with you. With me, my son, said the Sub-Prior, thou shalt surely go, But our rule, as well as reason and good order, require that you should dwell a space with us as a probationer or novice, before taking upon thee those final vows, which, sequestering thee forever from the world, dedicate thee to the service of heaven." "And when shall we set forth, father?" said the youth, as eagerly as if the journey which he was now undertaking led to the pleasures of a summer holiday. "Even now, if thou wilt," said the Sub Prior, yielding to his impetuosity. "Go, then, and command them to prepare for our departure. Yet stay," he said, as Edward, with all the awakened enthusiasm of his character, hastened from his presence. "Come hither, my son, and kneel down." Edward obeyed, and kneeled down before him. Notwithstanding his slight figure and thin features, the Sub Prior could, from the energy of his tone and the earnestness of his devotional manner, impress his pupils and his penitents with no ordinary feelings of personal reverence. His heart always was, as well as seemed to be, in the duty which he was immediately performing, and the spiritual guide who thus shows a deep conviction of the importance of his office seldom fails to impress a similar feeling upon his hearers. Upon such occasions as the present, his puny body seemed to assume more majestic stature. His spare and emaciated countenance bore a bolder, loftier, and more commanding port. His voice, always beautiful, trembled as labouring under the immediate impulse of the divinity, and his whole demeanour seemed to bespeak not the mere ordinary man, but the organ of the Church in which she had vested her high power for delivering sinners from their load of iniquity. "Hast thou, my fair son," said he, "faithfully recounted the circumstances which have thus suddenly determined thee to a religious life?" "The sins I have confessed, my father," answered Edward, "but I have not yet told of a strange appearance, which, acting in my mind, hath, I think, aided to determine my resolution." "Tell it then now," returned the Sub Prior. "It is thy duty to leave me uninstructed in naught, so that thereby I may understand the temptation that besets thee." "I tell it with unwillingness," said Edward, "for although, God wot, I speak but the mere truth, yet even while my tongue speaks it as truth, my own ears receive it as fable." "Yet say the whole," said Father Eustace; "neither fear rebuke from me, seeing I may know reasons for receiving as true that which others might regard as fabulous." "Know then, father," replied Edward, "that betwixt hope and despair, and heavens, what a hope! The hope to find the corpse mangled and crushed hastily in amongst the bloody clay which the foot of the scornful victor had trod down upon my good, my gentle, my courageous brother, I sped to the glen called Corrinan Shian. But as your reverence has been already informed, neither the grave, which my unhallowed wishes had, in spite of my better self, longed to see, nor any appearance of the earth having been opened, was visible in the solitary spot where Martin had, at morning yesterday, seen the fatal hillock. You know your dalesmen, father. The place hath an evil name, and this deception of the sight inclined them to leave it. My companions became affrighted, and hastened down the glen as men caught in trespass. My hopes were too much blighted, my mind too much agitated, to fear either the living or the dead. I descended the glen more slowly than they, often looking back, and not ill pleased with the poltroonery of my companions, which left me to my own perplexed and moody humour, and induced them to hasten into the broader dale. They were already out of sight, and lost amongst the windings of the glen, when, looking back, I saw a female form standing beside the fountain. How, my fair son," said the Sub Prior, "beware you jest not with your present situation." "I jest not, father," answered the youth. "It may be I shall never jest again, surely not for many a day. I saw, I say, the form of a female clad in white, such as the spirit which haunts the house of Avenel is supposed to be. Believe me, my father, for by heaven and earth I say naught but what I saw with these eyes." "I believe thee, my son," said the monk. "Proceed in thy strange story." "The apparition," said Edward Glendinning, "sung and thus ran her lay, for, strange as it may seem to you, her words abide by my remembrance as if they had been sung to me from infancy upward. Thou who seekest my fountain lone, with thoughts and hopes thou darest not own, whose heart within leaped wildly glad when most his brow seemed dark and sad, hie thee back, thou findest not here corpse or coffin, grave or bier. The dead alive is gone and fled, Go thou, and join the living dead. The living dead, whose sober brow oft shrouds such thoughts as thou hast now, whose hearts within are seldom cured of passions by their vows abjured, where, under sad and solemn show, vain hopes are nursed, wild wishes glow. Seek the convent's vaulted room, prayer and vigil be thy doom. Doff the green and don the grey, to the cloister hence away. "'Tis a wild lay," said the Sub-Prior, "and chanted, I fear me, with no good end. But we have power to turn the machinations of Satan to his shame. Edward, thou shalt go with me as thou desirest. Thou shalt prove the life for which I have long thought thee best fitted. Thou shalt aid, my son, this trembling hand of mine to sustain the holy ark, which bold unhallowed men press rashly forward to touch and to profane. Wilt thou not first see thy mother?" "I will see no one," said Edward hastily. "I will risk nothing that may shake the purpose of my heart. From Saint Mary's they shall learn my destination, all of them shall learn it. My mother, Mary Avenel, my restored and happy brother, they shall all know that Edward lives no longer to the world to be a clog on their happiness. Mary shall no longer need to constrain her looks and expressions to coldness because I am nigh. She shall no longer—" "My son," said the Sub-Prior, interrupting him, "it is not by looking back on the vanities and vexations of this world that we fit ourselves for the discharge of duties which are not of it. Go, get our horses ready, and as we descend the glen together, I will teach thee the truths through which the fathers and wise men of old had that precious alchemy which can convert suffering into happiness." End of chapter 32. Chapter 33, Part A of The Monastery by Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 33, Part A. Now, on my faith, this gear is all entangled, like to the yarn clue of the drowsy knitter, dragged by the frolic kitten through the cabin, while the good dame sits nodding o'er the fire. Masters, attend, 'twill crave some skill to clear it. Old Play. Edward, with the speed of one who doubts the steadiness of his own resolution, hastened to prepare the horses for their departure, and at the same time thanked and dismissed the neighbours who had come to his assistance, and who were not a little surprised both at the suddenness of his proposed departure and at the turn affairs had taken. "Here's cold hospitality," quoth Dan of the Howlet Hurst to his comrades. "I trow the Glendinnings may die and come alive right oft, ere I put foot in stirrup again for the matter." Martin soothed them by placing food and liquor before them. They ate sullenly, however, and departed in bad humour. The joyful news that Halbert Glendinning lived was quickly communicated through the sorrowing family. The mother wept and thanked Heaven alternately, until her habits of domestic economy awakening as her feelings became calmer, she observed, "It would be an unco task to mend the yetts, and what were they to do while they were broken in that fashion? At open doors dogs come in." Tib remarked, "She aye thought Albert was ower gleg at his weapon to be killed sae easily by ony Sir Piercie of them a'. They might say of these Southrons as they liked, but they had not the pith and wind of a canny Scot when it came to close grips." On Mary Avenel the impression was inconceivably deeper. She had but newly learned to pray, and it seemed to her that her prayers had been instantly answered, that the compassion of Heaven, which she had learned to implore in the words of Scripture, had descended upon her after a manner almost miraculous, and recalled the dead from the grave at the sound of her lamentations. There was a dangerous degree of enthusiasm in this strain of feeling, but it originated in the purest devotion. A silken and embroidered muffler, one of the few articles of more costly attire which she possessed, was devoted to the purpose of wrapping up and concealing the sacred volume, which henceforth she was to regard as her chiefest treasure, lamenting only that, for want of a fitting interpreter, much must remain to her a book closed and a fountain sealed. She was unaware of the yet greater danger she incurred, of putting an imperfect or even false sense upon some of the doctrines which appeared most comprehensible, but Heaven had provided against both these hazards. While Edward was preparing the horses, Christie of the Clinthill again solicited his orders respecting the reformed preacher, Henry Warden, and again the worthy monk laboured to reconcile in his own mind the compassion and esteem which, almost in spite of him, he could not help feeling for his former companion, with the duty he owed to the Church. The unexpected resolution of Edward had removed, he thought, the chief objection to his being left at Glendearg. "If I carry this Wellwood or Warden to the Monastery," he thought, "he must die in his heresy, perish body and soul. And though such a measure was once thought advisable, to strike terror into the heretics, yet such is now their daily increasing strength, that it may rather rouse them to fury and to revenge. True, he refuses to pledge himself to abstain from sowing his tares among the wheat, but the ground here is too barren to receive them. I fear not his making impression on these poor women, the vassals of the Church, and bred up in due obedience to her behests. The keen, searching, inquiring, and bold disposition of Edward might have afforded fuel to the fire, but that is removed, and there is nothing left which the flame may catch to. Thus shall he have no power to spread his evil doctrines abroad, and yet his life shall be preserved, and it may be his soul rescued as a prey from the fowler's net. I will myself contend with him in argument, for when we studied in common I yielded not to him, and surely the cause for which I struggle will support me, were I yet more weak than I deem myself. Were this man reclaimed from his errors, an hundredfold more advantage would arise to the Church from his spiritual regeneration than from his temporal death." Having finished these meditations, in which there was at once goodness of disposition and narrowness of principle, a considerable portion of self-opinion, and no small degree of self-delusion, the Sub-Prior commanded the prisoner to be brought into his presence. "Henry," he said, "whatever a rigid sense of duty may demand of me, ancient friendship and Christian compassion forbid me to lead thee to assured death. Thou wert wont to be generous, though stern and stubborn in thy resolves. Let not thy sense of what thine own thoughts term duty draw thee farther than mine have done. Remember that every sheep whom thou shalt here lead astray from the fold will be demanded in time and through eternity of him who hath left thee the liberty of doing such evil. I ask no engagement of thee, save that thou remain a prisoner, on thy word, at this tower, and wilt appear when summoned." "Thou hast found an invention to bind my hands," replied the preacher, "more sure than would have been the heaviest shackles in the prison of thy convent. I will not rashly do what may endanger thee with thy unhappy superiors, and I will be the more cautious, because, if we had farther opportunity of conference, I trust thine own soul may yet be rescued as a brand from the burning, and that, casting from thee the livery of Antichrist, that traitor in human sins and human souls, I may yet assist thee to lay hold on the Rock of Ages." The Sub-Prior heard the sentiment, so similar to that which had occurred to himself, with the same kindly feelings with which the gamecock hears and replies to the challenge of his rival. "I bless God and Our Lady," said he, drawing himself up, "that my faith is already anchored on that rock on which Saint Peter founded his church." "It is a perversion of the text," said the eager Henry Warden, "grounded on a vain play upon words, a most idle paronomasia. The controversy would have been rekindled, and in all probability, for what can ensure the good temper and moderation of polemics, might have ended in the preacher's being transported a captive to the Monastery, had not Christie of the Clinthill observed that it was growing late, and that he, having to descend the glen, which had no good reputation, cared not greatly for travelling there after sunset. The Sub-Prior, therefore, stifled his desire of argument, and again telling the preacher that he trusted to his gratitude and generosity, he bade him farewell. "Be assured, my old friend," replied Warden, "that no willing act of mine shall be to thy prejudice. But if my master shall place work before me, I must obey God rather than man." These two men, both excellent from natural disposition and acquired knowledge, had more points of similarity than they themselves would have admitted. In truth, the chief distinction betwixt them was, that the Catholic, defending a religion which afforded little interest to the feelings, had, in his devotion to the cause he espoused, more of the head than of the heart, and was politic, cautious, and artful; while the Protestant, acting under the strong impulse of more lately adopted conviction, and feeling, as he justly might, a more animated confidence in his cause, was enthusiastic, eager, and precipitate in his desire to advance it. The priest would have been contented to defend, the preacher aspired to conquer, and of course the impulse by which the latter was governed was more active and more decisive. They could not part from each other without a second pressure of hands, and each looked in the face of his old companion, as he bade him adieu, with a countenance strongly expressive of sorrow, affection, and pity. Father Eustace then explained briefly to Dame Glendinning that this person was to be her guest for some days, forbidding her and her whole household, under high spiritual censures, to hold any conversation with him on religious subjects, but commanding her to attend to his wants in all other particulars. "May Our Lady forgive me, reverend father," said Dame Glendinning, somewhat dismayed at this intelligence, "but I must needs say, that our money guests have been the ruin of many a house, and I trow they will bring down Glendearg. First came the Lady of Avenel, her soul be at rest, she meant nae ill, but she brought with her as mony bogles and fairies as ha' kept the house in care ever since, say that we have been living as it were in a dream. And then came that English knight, if it please you, and if he hasna killed my son outright, he has chased him aff the gate, and it may be lang enough ere I see him again, for by the damage done to outer door and inner door. And now your reverence has given me the charge of a heretic who, it is like, may bring the great horned devil himself down upon us all, and they say that it is neither door nor window will serve him, but he will take away the side of the old tower along with him. Nevertheless, reverend father, your pleasure is doubtless to be done to our power." "Go to, woman," said the Sub Prior, "send for workmen from the clachan, and let them charge the expense of their repairs to the community, and I will give the treasurer warrant to allow them. Moreover, in settling the rental mails and few duties, thou shalt have allowance for the trouble and charges to which thou art now put, and I will cause strict search to be made after thy son." The dame curtsied deep and low at each favourable expression, and when the Sub Prior had done speaking, she added her farther hope that the Sub Prior would hold some communing with her gossip the miller concerning the fate of his daughter, and expound to him that the chance had by no means happened through any negligence on her part. "I sair doubt me, father," she said, "whether Mysie finds her way back to the mill in a hurry. But it was all her father's own fault that let her run lamping about the country, riding on bare-backed nags, and never settling to do a turn of work within doors, unless it were to dress dainties at dinner time for his ain kite." "You remind me, dame, of another matter of urgency," said Father Eustace, "and God knows too many of them press on me at this moment. This English knight must be sought out, and explanation given to him of these most strange chances. The giddy girl must also be recovered. If she hath suffered in reputation by this unhappy mistake, I will not hold myself innocent of the disgrace." End of chapter 33, part A. Chapter 33, part B of The Monastery by Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 33, part B. "Yet how to find them out, I know not." "So please you," said Christie of the Clinthill, "I am willing to take the chase, and bring them back by fair means or foul. For though you have always looked as black as night at me, whenever we have foregathered, yet I have not forgotten that had it not been for you, my neck would have kenned the weight of my 4 quarters. If any man can track the tread of them, I will say in the face of both Merse and Teviotdale, and take the forest to boot, I am that man. But first I have matters to treat of on my master's score, if you will permit me to ride down the glen with you." "Nay, but my friend," said the Sub Prior, "thou shouldst remember I have but slender cause to trust thee for a companion through a place so solitary." "Tush, tush," said the jackman, "fear me not. I had the worst too surely to begin that sport again. Besides, Have I not said a dozen of times I owe you a life? And when I owe a man either a good turn or a bad, I never fail to pay it sooner or later. Moreover, beshrew me if I dare to go alone down the glen, or even with my troopers, who are, every loon of them, as much devil's bairns as myself. Whereas, if your reverence, since that is the word, take beads and salter, and I come along with jack and spear, you will make the devils take the air, and I will make all human enemies take the earth." Edward here entered, and told his reverence that his horse was prepared. At this instant his eye caught his mother's, and the resolution which he had so strongly formed was staggered when he recollected the necessity of bidding her farewell. The Sub-Prior saw his embarrassment, and came to his relief. "Dame," said he, "I forgot to mention that your son Edward goes with me to St. Mary's, and will not return for 2 or 3 days. You be wishing to help him to recover his brother? May the saints reward your kindness." The Sub-Prior returned the benediction, which, in this instance, he had not very well deserved, and he and Edward set forth on their route. They were presently followed by Christie, who came up with his followers at such a speedy pace, as intimated sufficiently that his wish to obtain spiritual convoy through the glen was extremely sincere. He had, however, other matters to stimulate his speed, for he was desirous to communicate to the Sub-Prior a message from his master Julian, connected with the delivery of the prisoner Warden, and having requested the Sub-Prior to ride with him a few yards before Edward, and the troopers of his own party, he thus addressed him, sometimes interrupting his discourse in a manner testifying that his fear of supernatural beings was not altogether lulled to rest by his confidence in the sanctity of his fellow traveller. "My master," said the rider, "deemed he had sent you an acceptable gift in that old heretic preacher, but it seems, from the slight care you have taken of him, that you make small account of the boon." "Nay," said the Sub-Prior, "do not thus judge of it. The community must account highly of the service, and will reward it to thy master in goodly fashion. But this man and I are old friends, and I trust to bring him back from the paths of perdition." "Nay," said the moss trooper, "when I saw you shake hands at the beginning, I counted that you would fight it all out in love and honour, and that there would be no extreme dealings betwixt ye. However, it is all one to my master. Saint Mary, what call you yon, Sir Monk?" "The branch of a willow streaming across the path betwixt us and the sky." "Beshrew me," said Christie, "if it looked not like a man's hand holding a sword. But touching my master, he, like a prudent man, hath kept himself aloof in these broken times, until he could see with precision what footing he was to stand upon. Right tempting offers he hath had from the lords of congregation, whom you call heretics, and at one time he was minded, to be plain with you, to have taken their way, for he was assured that the Lord James, [Footnote: Lord James Stewart, afterwards the Regent Murray.] was coming this road at the head of a round body of cavalry, and accordingly Lord James did so far reckon upon him, that he sent this man Warden, or whatsoever be his name, to my master's protection as an assured friend, and moreover, with tidings that he himself was marching hitherward at the head of a strong body of horse." "Now Our Lady forfend," said the Sub-Prior. "Amen," answered Christie, in some trepidation. "Did your reverence see aught?" "Nothing whatever," replied the monk. "It was thy tale which wrested me from that exclamation." "And it was some cause," replied he of the Clinthill, "for if Lord James should come hither, your Halidome would smoke for it. But be of good cheer, that expedition is ended before it was begun. The Baron of Avenel had sure news that Lord James has been fain to march westward with his merry men, to protect Lord Semple against Cassilis and the Kennedys. By my faith, it will cost him a brush, for wot ye what they say of that name? Twixt Wigton and the town of Ayr, Portpatrick and the Creeves of Cree, no man need think for to bide there, unless he court Saint Kennedy." "Then," said the Sub-Prior, "the Lord James's purpose of coming southwards being broken, cost this person, Henry Warden, a cold reception at Avenel Castle." "It would not have been altogether so rough a one," said the moss trooper, "for my master was in heavy thought what to do in these unsettled times, and would scarce have hazarded misusing a man sent to him by so terrible a leader as the Lord James. But to speak the truth, some busy devil tempted the old man to meddle with my master's Christian liberty of handfasting with Catherine of Newport. So that broke the wand of peace between them, and now ye may have my master, and all the force he can make, at your devotion, for Lord James never forgave wrong done to him. And if he come by the upper hand, he will have Julian's head, if there were never another of the name, as it is like there is not, excepting the bit slip of a lassie yonder. And now I have told you more of my master's affairs than he would thank me for. But you have done me a frank turn once, and I may need one at your hands again." "Thy frankness," said the Sub-Prior, "shall surely advantage thee, for much it concerns the Church in these broken times to know the purposes and motives of those around us. But what is it that thy master expects from us in reward of good service? For I esteem him one of those who are not willing to work without their hire." "Nay, that I can tell you flatly, for Lord James had promised him, in case he would be of his faction in these parts, an easy tack of the tane sheaves of his own barony of Avenel, together with the lands of Cranberry Moor, which lie intersected with his own, and he will look for no less at your hand." "But there is old Gilbert of Cranberry Moor," said the Sub-Prior. "What are we to make of him? The heretic Lord James may take on him to dispone upon the goods and lands of the Halidome at his pleasure, because doubtless, but for the protection of God, and the baronage which yet remain faithful to their creed, he may despoil us of them by force. But while they are the property of the community, we may not take steadings from ancient and faithful vassals, to gratify the covetousness of those who serve God only from the lucre of gain." "By the mast," said Christie, "it is well talking, Sir Priest. But when you consider that Gilbert has but 2 half-starved cowardly peasants to follow him, and only an old jaded aver to ride upon, fitter for the plough than for manly service, and that the Baron of Avenel never rides with fewer than 10 jackmen on his back, and oftener with 50, bowden in all that affairs to war, as if they were to do battle for a kingdom, and mounted on nags that nicker at the clash of the sword as if it were the clank of the lid of a corn chest, I say, when ye have computed all this, ye may guess what course will best serve your monastery." "Friend," said the monk, "I would willingly purchase thy master's assistance on his own terms, since times leave us no better means of defence against sacrilegious spoliation of heresy. But to take from a poor man his patrimony—" "For that matter," said the rider, "his seat would scarce be a soft one, if my master thought that Gilbert's interest stood betwixt him and what he wishes. The Halidome has land enough, and Gilbert may be quartered elsewhere." "We will consider the possibility of so disposing the matter," said the monk, "and will expect in consequence your master's most active assistance, with all the followers he can make, to join in the defence of the Halidome against any force by which it may be threatened." "A man's hand and a mailed glove on that," said the jackman. They, footnote, as some atonement for their laxity of morals on most occasions, the Borderers were severe observers of the faith which they had pledged, even to an enemy. If any person broke his word so plighted, the individual to whom faith had not been observed used to bring to the next Border meeting a glove hung on the point of a spear, and proclaim to Scots and English the name of the defaulter. This was accounted so great a disgrace to all connected with him, that his own clansmen sometimes destroyed him, to escape the infamy he had brought on them. Constable, a spy engaged by Sir Ralph Sadler, talks of 2 Border thieves whom he used as his guides, that they would not care to steal, and yet that they would not betray any man that trusts in them, for all the gold in Scotland or France. They are my guides and outlaws. If they would betray me, they might get their pardons, and cause me to be hanged. But I have tried them ere this. Sadler's Letters during the Northern Insurrection. End footnote. Call us marauders, thieves, and what not, but the side we take we hold by, and I will be blithe when my baron comes to appoint which side he will take, for the castle is a kind of hell, Our Lady forgive me for naming such a word in this place, while he is in his mood, studying how he may best advantage himself. And now, heaven be praised, we are in the open valley, and I may swear a round oath, should aught happen to provoke it." "My friend," said the Sub-Prior, "thou hast little merit in abstaining from oaths or blasphemy, if it be only out of fear of evil spirits." "Nay, I am not quite a church vassal yet," said the jackman, "and if you link the curb too tight on a young horse, I promise you he will rear. Why, it is much for me to forbear old customs on any account whatever." The night being fine, they forded the river at the spot where the sacristan met with his unhappy encounter with the spirit. As soon as they arrived at the gate of the monastery, the porter, in waiting eagerly, exclaimed, "Reverend Father, the Lord Abbot is most anxious for your presence." "Let these strangers be carried to the great hall," said the Sub-Prior, "and be treated with the best by the cellarer, reminding them, however, of that modesty and decency of conduct which becometh guests in a house like this." "But the Lord Abbot demands you instantly, my venerable brother," said Father Philip, arriving in great haste. "I have not seen him more discouraged or desolate of counsel since the field of Pinkie Cleugh was stricken." "I come, my good brother, I come," said Father Eustace. "I pray thee, good brother, let this youth, Edward Glendinning, be conveyed to the chamber of the novices, and placed under their instructor. God hath touched his heart, and he proposeth, laying aside the vanities of the world, to become a brother of our holy order, which, if his good parts be matched with fitting docility and humility, he may one day live to adorn." "My very venerable brother," exclaimed old Father Nicholas, who came hobbling with a third summons to the Sub-Prior, "I pray thee to hasten to our worshipful Lord Abbot. The holy patroness be with us. Never saw I Abbot of the house of St. Mary's in such consternation. And yet I remember me well when Father Ingelram had the news of Flodden Field." I come, venerable brother," said Father Eustace, and having repeatedly ejaculated, "I come," he at last went to the Abbot in good earnest. End of chapter 33. Part B. Chapter 34, Part A of the Monastery by Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 34, Part A. It is not texts will do it. Church artillery are silenced soon by real ordnance, and cannons are but vain opposed to cannon. Go, coin your crosier, melt your church plate down, bid the starved soldier banquet in your halls, and quaff your long-saved hogsheads. Turn them out, thus primed with your good cheer, to guard your wall, and they will venture for it. Old Play. The Abbot received his counsellor with a tremulous eagerness of welcome, which announced to the Sub-Prior an extreme agitation of spirits, and the utmost need of good counsel. There was neither mazer dish nor standing cup upon the little table, at the elbow of his huge chair of state. His beads alone lay there, and it seemed as if he had been telling them in his extremity of distress. Beside the beads was placed the mitre of the Abbot, of an antique form, and blazing with precious stones, and the rich and highly embossed crosier rested against the same table. The sacristan and old Father Nicholas had followed the Sub-Prior into the Abbot's apartment, perhaps with the hope of learning something of the important matter which seemed to be in hand. They were not mistaken, for after having ushered in the Sub-Prior, and being themselves in the act of retiring, the Abbot made them a signal to remain. "My brethren," he said, "it is well known to you with what painful zeal we have overseen the weighty affairs of this house committed to our unworthy hand. Your bread hath been given to you, and your water hath been sure. I have not wasted the revenues of the convent on vain pleasures, as hunting or hawking, or in change of rich cope or alb, or in feasting idle bards and jesters, saving those who according to old wont were received in time of Christmas and Easter. Neither have I enriched either mine own relations nor strange women, at the expense of the patrimony." "There hath not been such a Lord Abbot," said Father Nicholas, "to my knowledge, since the days of Abbot Ingelram, who," at that portentous word, which always preluded a long story, the abbot broke in. "May God have mercy on his soul! We talk not of him now. What I would know of ye, my brethren, is whether I have, in your mind, faithfully discharged the duties of mine office." "There has never been subject of complaint," answered the Sub-Prior. The sacristan, more diffuse, enumerated the various acts of indulgence and kindness which the mild government of Abbot Boniface had conferred on the Brotherhood of St. Mary's. The indulgentiae, the gratias, the biberes, the weekly mess of boiled almonds, the enlarged accommodation of the refectory, the better arrangement of the cellarage, the improvement of the revenue of the monastery, the diminution of the privations of the brethren. "You might have added, my brother," said the abbot, listening with melancholy acquiescence to the detail of his own merits, "that I caused to be built that curious screen which secureth the cloisters from the northeast wind. But all these things avail nothing. As we read in Holy Maccabee, capta est civitas per voluntatem Dei. It hath cost me no little thought, no common toil, to keep these weighty matters in such order as you have seen them. There was both barn and bin to be kept full, infirmary, dormitory, guest hall, and refectory to be looked to, processions to be made, confessions to be heard, strangers to be entertained, veniae to be granted or refused, and I warrant me, when every one of you was asleep in your cell, the abbot hath lain awake for a full hour by the bell, thinking how these matters might be ordered seemly and suitably. May we ask, reverend my lord," said the Sub-Prior, "what additional care has now been thrown upon you, since your discourse seems to point that way?" "Marry, this is it," said the abbot. "The talk is not now of biberes." [Footnote: The biberes, caritas, and boiled almonds, of which Abbot Boniface speaks, were special occasions for enjoying luxuries, afforded to the monks by grants from different sovereigns, or from other benefactors to the convent. There is one of these charters called De Pintantia Centum Librarem. By this charter, which is very curious, our Robert Bruce, on the 10th of January, and in the 12th year of his reign, assigns out of the customs of Berwick, and failing them, out of the customs of Edinburgh or Haddington, the sum of 100 pounds, at the half-yearly terms of Pentecost and St. Martin's in winter, to the abbot and community of the monks of Melrose. The precise purpose of this annuity is to furnish to each of the monks of the said monastery, while placed at food in the refectory, an extra mess of rice boiled with milk, or of almonds, or peas, or other pulse of that kind which could be procured in the country. This addition to their commons is to be entitled the King's Mess, and it is declared, that although any monk should, from honest apology, want appetite or inclination to eat of the King's Mess, his share should, nevertheless, be placed on the table with those of his brethren, and afterwards carried to the gate and given to the poor. Neither is it our pleasure, continues the bountiful sovereign, that the dinner, which is or ought to be served up to the said monks according to their ancient rule, should be diminished in quantity or rendered inferior in quality on account of this our mess, so furnished as aforesaid. It is moreover provided, that the abbot, with the consent of the most sage of his brethren, shall name a prudent and decent monk for receiving, directing, and expending all matters concerning this annuity for the benefit of the community, agreeably to the royal desire and intention, rendering a faithful account thereof to the abbot and superiors of the same convent. And the same charter declares the king's farther pleasure, that the said men of religion should be bound yearly and for ever, in acknowledgment of the above donation, to clothe 15 poor men at the feast of St. Martin in winter, and to feed them on the same day, delivering to each of them 4 ells of large or broad, or 6 ells of narrow cloth, and to each also a new pair of shoes or sandals, according to their order. And if the said monks shall fail in their engagements, or any of them, it is the king's will that the fault shall be redeemed by a double performance of what has been omitted, to be executed at the sight of the chief forester of Ettrick for the time being, and before the return of St. Martin's Day succeeding that on which the omission has taken place. Of this charter, respecting the pittance of 100, I assigned to furnish the monks of Melrose with a daily mess of boiled rice, almonds, or other pulse, to mend their commons. The antiquarian reader will be pleased, doubtless, to see the original.
Carta Regis Roberti Primus, Abbati et Conventui de Melrose. Carta de Pitancia 100 librarum. Robertus Dei gratia Rex Scotorum, omnibus probis, hominibus tocius terre sue salutem. Sciatis nos pro salute anime nostre et pro salute animarum antecessorum et successorum nostrorum regum Scotiae dedisse concessisse et ac presenti carta nostra confirmasse Deo et beate Mariae Virgini et religiosis viris abbati et conventui de Melrose et eorum successoribus in perpetuum 100 libras sterlingorum annui reditus singulis annis percipiendas de firmis nostris burgi Berwici super. Tuedam ad terminos Pentecostis et Sancti Martini in iemme pro equali portione vel de nova custuma nostra burgi predictis firme nostre predicte ad dictam summam pecuniae sufficiere non poterunt vel de nova custuma nostra burgorum nostrorum de Edinburgh et de Haddington si firme nostre et custuma nostra vile Berwici aliquo casu contingente ad hoc forte non sufficiant. Ita quod dicta summa pecuniae 100 librarum eis annuatim integre et absque contradictione aliqua plenarie persolvatur precunctis aliis, qui buscunque assignationibus per nos factis seu faciendis ad inveniendum in perpetuum singulis diebus qui libet monaco monasterii predicti comedenti in refectorio unum sufficiens ferculum risarum factarum cum lacte amygdalarum vel pissarum sive aliorum ciborum consimilis conditionis inventorum in patria et illud ferculum regis vocabitur in aeternum et si aliquis monachus ex aliqua causa honesta de dicto ferculo comedere noluerit vel refici non poterit non minus atamen sibi de dicto ferculo ministretur et ad portam pro pauperibus deportetur. Nec volumus quod occasione ferculi nostri predicti prandium dicti conventus de quo antiquitus communiter eis deserviri sive ministrari solevat in aliquo pejoretur seu diminuatur. Volum us in super et ordinamus quod abbas eiusdem monasterii qui pro tempore fuerit de consensu saniorum de conventu specialiter constituat unum monachum providum et discretum ad recipiendum ordinandum et expendendum totam summam pecuniae memorate pro utilitate conventus secundum votum et intentionem mentis nostre superius annotatum et ad redendum fidele compotum coram abbate et maioribus de conventu singulis annis de pecunia sic recepta. Et volumus quod dicti religiosi teneantur annuatim in perpetuum pro predicta donatione nostra ad perpetuam nostri memoriam vestire 15 pauperes ad festum Sancti Martini in ieme et eosdem civare eodem die liberando eorum qui libet quatuor ulnas panni grossi et lati vel sex ulnas panni stricti et eorum qui libet unum novum par sotularium de ordine suo. Et si dicti religiosi in premissis vel aliquo premissorum aliquo anno defecerint volumus quod illud quod minus per impletum fuerit duplicetur diebus magis necessariis per visum capitalis forestarii nostri de Selkirk, qui pro tempore fuerit, et quod dicta duplicatio fiat ante Natale Domini proximo sequens festum Sancti Martini predictum, in cuius rei testimonium presenti carte nostre sigillum nostrum precipimus apponi. Testibus venerabilibus in Christo patribus Willielmo, Ioanne, Willielmo et David, Sancti Andree, Glasguensis, Dunkeldensis et Moraviensis, Ecclesiarum Dei Gratia, Episcopis Bernardo, Abbate de Abirbrotoc, Cancellario, Duncano, Malicio, et Ugone de Fif, de Stratin et de Ros, comitibus Waltero Senescalo, Scoccie, Jacobo Domini, de Douglas et Alexandro Fraser, camerario nostro, socie militibus. Apud Abirbrotoc 10 die Januarii anno regni nostri 20.
End footnote. Or of Caritas, or of boiled almonds, but of an English band coming against us from Hexham, commanded by Sir John Foster. Nor is it of the screening us from the east wind, but how to escape Lord James Stuart, who cometh to lay waste and destroy with his heretic soldiers. I thought that purpose had been broken by the feud between Semple and the Kennedys, said the Sub-Prior hastily. They have accorded that matter at the expense of the church as usual, said the Abbot. The Earl of Cassilis is to have the 10 sheaves of his lands, which were given to the house of Crossraguel, and he has stricken hands with Stuart, who is now called Murray. Principis convenerant unum adversus dominum. There are the letters. The Sub-Prior took the letters, which had come by an express messenger from the Primate of Scotland, who still laboured to uphold the tottering fabric of the system under which he was at length buried, and, stepping towards the lamp, read them with an air of deep and settled attention. The sacristan and Father Nicholas looked as helplessly at each other as the denizens of the poultry yard when the hawk soars over it. The Abbot seemed bowed down with the extremity of sorrowful apprehension, but kept his eye timorously fixed on the Sub-Prior, as if striving to catch some comfort from the expression of his countenance. When at length he beheld that, after a second intent perusal of the letters, he remained still silent and full of thought, he asked him in an anxious tone, "What is to be done?" "Our duty must be done," answered the Sub-Prior, "and the rest is in the hands of God." "Our duty! Our duty?" answered the Abbot impatiently. "Doubtless we are to do our duty, but what is that duty? Or how will it serve us? Will bell, book, and candle drive back the English heretics? Or will Murray care for psalms and antiphonars? Or can I fight for the Halidome, like Judas Maccabeus, against those profane Nicanors? Or send the sacristan against this new Holofernes, to bring back his head in a basket?" "True, my Lord Abbot," said the Sub-Prior, "we cannot fight with carnal weapons, it is alike contrary to our habit and vow. But we can die for our convent and for our order. Besides, we can arm those who will and can fight. The English are but few in number, trusting, as it would seem, that they will be joined by Murray, whose march has been interrupted. If Foster, with his Cumberland and Hexham bandits, ventures to march into Scotland, to pillage and despoil our house, we will levy our vassals, and I trust shall be found strong enough to give him battle." "In the blessed name of Our Lady," said the Abbot, "think you that I am Petrus Eremita, to go forth the leader of an host?" "Nay," said the Sub-Prior, "let some man skilled in war lead our people. There is Julian Avenel, an approved soldier." "But a scoffer, a debauched person, and in brief a man of Belial," quoth the Abbot. End of chapter 34, part A. Chapter 34, Part B of The Monastery, by Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 34, Part B. "Still," said the monk, "we must use his ministry in that to which he has been brought up. We can guerdon him richly, and indeed I already know the price of his service. The English, it is expected, will presently set forth, hoping here to seize upon Piercie Shafton, whose refuge being taken with us, they make the pretext of this unheard-of inroad." "Is it even so?" said the Abbot. "I never judged that his body of satin and his brain of feathers boded us much good." "Yet we must have his assistance, if possible," said the Sub-Prior. "He may interest in our behalf the great Piercie, of whose friendship he boasts, and that good and faithful lord may break Foster's purpose. I will dispatch the jackman after him with all speed. Chiefly, however, I trust to the military spirit of the land, which will not suffer peace to be easily broken on the frontier. Credit me, my lord, it will bring to our side the hands of many, whose hearts may have gone astray after strange doctrines. The great chiefs and barons will be ashamed to let the vassals of peaceful monks fight unaided against the old enemies of Scotland." "It may be," said the Abbot, "that Foster will wait for Murray, whose purpose hitherward is but delayed for a short space." "By the rood, he will not," said the Sub-Prior. "We know this Sir John Foster, a pestilent heretic, he will long to destroy the church. Born a borderer, he will thirst to plunder her of her wealth. A border warden, he will be eager to ride in Scotland. There are too many causes to urge him on. If he joins with Murray, he will have at best but an auxiliary share of the spoil. If he comes hither before him, he will reckon on the whole harvest of depredation as his own. Julian Avenel also has, as I have heard, some spite against Sir John Foster. They will fight, when they meet, with double determination. Sacristan, send for our bailiff. Where is the roll of fencible men, liable to do suit and service to the Halidome? Send off to the Baron of Megalot, he can raise 80 horse and better. Say to him the Monastery will compound with him for the customs of his bridge, which have been in controversy, if he will show himself a friend at such a point. And now, my lord, let us compute our possible numbers, and those of the enemy, that human blood be not spilled in vain. Let us therefore calculate—" "My brain is dizzied with the emergency," said the poor Abbot. "I am not, I think, more a coward than others, so far as my own person is concerned. But speak to me of marching, and collecting soldiers, and calculating forces, and you may as well tell of it to the youngest novice of a nunnery. But my resolution is taken. Brethren," he said, rising up and coming forward with that dignity which his comely person enabled him to assume, "hear for the last time the voice of your Abbot Boniface. I have done for you the best that I could. In quieter times I had perhaps done better. For it was for quiet that I sought the cloister, which has been to me a place of turmoil, as much as if I had sate in the receipt of custom, or ridden forth as leader of an armed host. But now matters turn worse and worse, and I, as I grow old, am less able to struggle with them. Also, it becomes me not to hold a place, whereof the duties, through my default or misfortune, may be but imperfectly filled by me. Wherefore I have resolved to demit this mine high office, so that the order of these matters may presently devolve upon Father Eustatius here present, our well-beloved sub-prior. And I now rejoice that he hath not been provided according to his merits elsewhere, seeing that I well hope he will succeed to the mitre and staff which it is my present purpose to lay down. In the name of Our Lady, do nothing hastily, my lord, said Father Nicholas. I do remember that when the worthy Abbot Ingelram, being in his 90th year, for I warrant you he could remember when Benedict the 13th was deposed, and being ill at ease and bedrid, the brethren rounded in his ear that he were better resign his office. And what said he, being a pleasant man? Marry, that while he could crook his little finger, he would keep hold of the crosier with it. The sacristan also strongly remonstrated against the resolution of his superior, and set down the insufficiency he pleaded to the native modesty of his disposition. The abbot listened in downcast silence. Even flattery could not win his ear. Father Eustace took a nobler tone with his disconcerted and dejected superior. "My Lord Abbot," he said, "if I have been silent concerning the virtues with which you have governed this house, do not think that I am unaware of them. I know that no man ever brought to your high office a more sincere wish to do well to all mankind, and if your rule has not been marked with the bold lines which sometimes distinguished your spiritual predecessors, their faults have equally been strangers to your character." "I did not believe," said the abbot, turning his looks to Father Eustace with some surprise, "that you, father, of all men, would have done me this justice." "In your absence," said the Sub-Prior, "I have even done it more fully. Do not lose the good opinion which all men entertain of you, by renouncing your office when your care is most needed." "But, my brother," said the abbot, "I leave a more able in my place." "That you do not," said Eustace, "because it is not necessary you should resign in order to possess the use of whatever experience or talent I may be accounted master of. I have been long enough in this profession to know that the individual qualities, which any of us may have, are not his own, but the property of the community, and only so far useful when they promote the general advantage. If you care not in person, my lord, to deal with this troublesome matter, let me implore you to go instantly to Edinburgh, and make what friends you can in our behalf, while I in your absence will, as Sub-Prior, do my duty in defence of the Halidome. If I succeed, may the honour and praise be yours, and if I fail, let the disgrace and shame be mine own." The abbot mused for a space, and then replied, "No, Father Eustatius, you shall not conquer me by your generosity. In times like these, this house must have a stronger pilotage than my weak hands afford, and he who steers the vessel must be chief of the crew. Shame were it to accept the praise of other men's labours, and in my poor mind, all the praise which can be bestowed on him who undertakes a task so perilous and perplexing is a meed beneath his merits. Misfortune to him would deprive him of an iota of it. Assume, therefore, your authority tonight, and proceed in the preparations you judge necessary. Let the chapter be summoned tomorrow, after we have heard Mass, and all shall be ordered as I have told you. Benedicite, my brethren. Peace be with you. May the new abbot expectant sleep as sound as he who is about to resign his mitre." They retired, affected even to tears. The good abbot had shown a point of his character to which they were strangers. Even Father Eustace had held his spiritual superior hitherto as a good-humoured, indolent, self-indulgent man, whose chief merit was the absence of gross faults. So that this sacrifice of power to a sense of duty, even if a little alloyed by the meaner motives of fear and apprehended difficulties, raised him considerably in the Sub-Prior's estimation. He even felt an aversion to profit by the resignation of the Abbot Boniface, and in a manner to rise on his ruins. But this sentiment did not long contend with those which led him to recollect higher considerations. It could not be denied that Boniface was entirely unfit for his situation in the present crisis. and the Sub-Prior felt that he himself, acting merely as a delegate, could not well take the decisive measures which the time required. The weal of the community therefore demanded his elevation. If, besides, there crept in a feeling of high dignity obtained, and the native exultation of a haughty spirit called to contend with the imminent dangers attached to a post of such distinction, these sentiments were so cunningly blended and amalgamated with others of a more disinterested nature, that, as the Sub-Prior himself was unconscious of their agency, we, who have a regard for him, are not solicitous to detect it. The Abbot-elect carried himself with more dignity than formerly, when giving such directions as the pressing circumstances of the times required, and those who approached him could perceive an unusual kindling of his falcon eye, and an unusual flush upon his pale and faded cheek. With briefness and precision he wrote and dictated various letters to different barons, acquainting them with the meditated invasion of the Halidome by the English, and conjuring them to lend aid and assistance as in a common cause. The temptation of advantage was held out to those whom he judged less sensible of the cause of honour, and all were urged by the motives of patriotism and ancient animosity to the English. The time had been when no such exhortations would have been necessary. But so essential was Elizabeth's aid to the reformed party in Scotland, and so strong was that party almost everywhere, that there was reason to believe a great many would observe neutrality on the present occasion, even if they did not go the length of uniting with the English against the Catholics. When Father Eustace considered the number of the immediate vassals of the Church, whose aid he might legally command, his heart sunk at the thoughts of ranking them under the banner of the fierce and profligate Julian Avenel. Were the young enthusiast Halbert Glendinning to be found, thought Father Eustace in his anxiety, I would have risked the battle under his leading, young as he is, and with better hope of God's blessing. But the bailiff is now too infirm, nor know I a chief of name whom I might trust in this important matter better than this Avenel. He touched a bell which stood on the table, and commanded Christie of the Clinthill to be brought before him. "Thou owest me a life," said he to that person on his entrance, "and I may do thee another good turn if thou beest sincere with me." Christie had already drained 2 standing cups of wine, which would, on another occasion, have added to the insolence of his familiarity. But at present there was something in the augmented dignity of manner of Father Eustace which imposed a restraint on him. Yet his answers partook of his usual character of undaunted assurance. He professed himself willing to return a true answer to all inquiries. "Has the Baron, so styled, of Avenel, any friendship with Sir John Foster, Warden of the West Marches of England?" "Such friendship as is between the wild cat and the terrier," replied the rider. "Will he do battle with him should they meet?" "As surely," answered Christie, "as ever cock fought on Shrovetide even." "And would he fight with Foster in the Church's quarrel?" "On any quarrel, or upon no quarrel whatever," replied the jackman. "We will then write to him, letting him know, that if upon occasion of an apprehended incursion by Sir John Foster, he will join his force with ours, he shall lead our men, and be gratified for doing so to the extent of his wish. Yet one word more. Thou didst say thou couldst find out where the English knight Sir Piercie Shafton has this day fled to?" "That I can, and bring him back too, by fair means or force, as best likes your reverence." "No force must be used upon him. Within what time wilt thou find him out?" "Within 30 hours, so he have not crossed the Lothian Firth. If it is to do you a pleasure, I will set off directly, and wind him as a sleuth dog tracks the moss trooper," answered Christie. "Bring him hither, then, and thou wilt deserve good at our hands, which I may soon have free means of bestowing on thee." "Thanks to your reverence, I put myself in your reverence's hands. We of the spear and snaffle walk something recklessly through life. But if a man were worse than he is, your reverence knows he must live, and that's not to be done without shifting, I trow." "Peace, sir, and begone on thine errand. Thou shalt have a letter from us to Sir Piercie." Christie made 2 steps towards the door. Then turning back and hesitating, like one who would make an impertinent pleasantry if he dared, he asked what he was to do with the wench Mysie Happer, whom the Southron knight had carried off with him. "Am I to bring her hither, please your reverence?" "Hither, you malapert knave," said the churchman, "remember to whom you speak." "No offence meant," replied Christie, "but if such is not your will, I would carry her to Avenel Castle, where a well-favoured wench was never unwelcome." "Bring the unfortunate girl to her father's, and break no scurril jests here," said the Sub Prior. "See that thou guide her in all safety and honour." "In safety, surely," said the rider, "and in such honour as her outbreak has left her. I bid your reverence farewell. I must be on horse before cock-crow." "What, in the dark? How knowest thou which way to go?" "I tracked the knight's horse tread as far as near to the ford, as we rode along together," said Christie, "and I observed the track turn to the northward. He is for Edinburgh, I will warrant you. So soon as daylight comes I will be on the road again. It is a kenspeckle hoofmark, for the shoe was made by old Eckie of Cannobie. I would swear to the curve of the caulker." So saying, he departed. "Hateful necessity," said Father Eustace, looking after him, "that obliges us to use such implements as these. But assailed as we are on all sides, and by all conditions of men, what alternative is left us? But now let me to my most needful task." The Abbot-elect accordingly sate down to write letters, arrange orders, and take upon him the whole charge of an institution which tottered to its fall, with the same spirit of proud and devoted fortitude wherewith the commander of a fortress, reduced nearly to the last extremity, calculates what means remain to him to protract the fatal hour of successful storm. In the meanwhile, Abbot Boniface, having given a few natural sighs to the downfall of the preeminence he had so long enjoyed amongst his brethren, fell fast asleep, leaving the whole cares and toils of office to his assistant. End of chapter 34, Part B. Chapter 35 of The Monastery by Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 35. And when he came to broken briggs, he slacked his bow and swam, and when he came to grass growing, set down his feet and ran. Gil Maurice. We return to Halbert Glendinning, who, as our readers may remember, took the high road to Edinburgh. His intercourse with the preacher Henry Warden, from whom he received a letter at the moment of his deliverance, had been so brief that he had not even learned the name of the nobleman to whose care he was recommended. Something like a name had been spoken, indeed, but he had only comprehended that he was to meet the chief advancing towards the south, at the head of a party of horse. When day dawned on his journey, he was in the same uncertainty. A better scholar would have been informed by the address of the letter, but Halbert had not so far profited by Father Eustace's lessons as to be able to decipher it. His mother wit taught him that he must not, in such uncertain times, be too hasty in asking information of any one. And when, after a long day's journey, night surprised him near a little village, he began to be dubious and anxious concerning the issue of his journey. In a poor country, hospitality is generally exercised freely, and Halbert, when he requested a night's quarters, did nothing either degrading or extraordinary. The old woman, to whom he made this request, granted it the more readily, that she thought she saw some resemblance between Halbert and her son Saunders, who had been killed in one of the frays so common in the time. It is true, Saunders was a short, square-made fellow, with red hair and a freckled face, and somewhat bandy-legged, whereas the stranger was of a brown complexion, tall, and remarkably well made. Nevertheless, the widow was clear that there existed a general resemblance betwixt her guest and Saunders, and kindly pressed him to share of her evening cheer. A pedlar, a man about 40 years old, was also her guest, who talked with great feeling of the misery of pursuing such a profession as his in the time of war and tumult. "We think much of knights and soldiers," said he, "but the pedder cough who travels the land has need of more courage than them all. I am sure he maun face mair risk, God help him. Here have I come this length, trusting the godly Earl of Murray would be on his march to the borders, for he was to have guestined with the Baron of Avenel, and instead of that comes news that he has gone westland ways, about some Twilsey in Ayrshire. And what to do, I wot not. For if I go to the south without a safeguard, the next bonny rider I meet might ease me of sack and pack, and maybe of my life to boot. And then if I try to strike across the moors, I may be as ill off before I can join myself to that good lord's company." No one was quicker at catching a hint than Halbert Glendinning. He said he himself had a desire to go westward. The pedlar looked at him with a very doubtful air, when the old dame, who perhaps thought her young guest resembled the umquhile Saunders, not only in his looks, but in a certain pretty turn to sleight of hand, which the defunct was supposed to have possessed, tipped him the wink, and assured the pedlar he need have no doubt that her young cousin was a true man. "Cousin," said the pedlar, "I thought you said this youth had been a stranger." "Ill hearing makes ill rehearsing," said the landlady. "He is a stranger to me by eyesight, but that does not make him a stranger to me by blood, more especially seeing his likeness to my son Saunders, poor bairn." The pedlar's scruples and jealousies being thus removed, or at least silenced, the travellers agreed that they would proceed in company together the next morning by daybreak, the pedlar acting as a guide to Glendinning, and the youth as a guard to the pedlar, till they should fall in with Murray's detachment of horse. It would appear that the lady never doubted what was to be the event of this compact, for, taking Glendinning aside, she charged him to be moderate with the poor body, but at all events not to forget to take a piece of black say, to make the old wife a new rokelay. Halbert laughed and took his leave. It did not a little appall the pedlar when, in the midst of a black heath, the young man told him the nature of the commission with which their hostess had charged him. He took heart, however, upon seeing the open, frank, and friendly demeanour of the youth, and vented his exclamations on the ungrateful old traitress. "I gave her," he said, "yesterday in, nay farther gane, a yard of that very black say, to make her a couvre-chef, but I see it is ill done to teach the cat the way to the kern." Thus set at ease on the intentions of his companion, for in those happy days the worst was always to be expected from a stranger, the pedlar acted as Halbert's guide over moss and moor, over hill and many a dale, in such a direction as might best lead them towards the route of Murray's party. At length they arrived upon the side of an eminence, which commanded a distant prospect over a tract of savage and desolate moorland, marshy and waste, an alternate change of shingly hill and level morass, only varied by blue stagnant pools of water. A road scarcely marked winded like a serpent through the wilderness, and the pedlar, pointing to it, said, "The road from Edinburgh to Glasgow. Here we must wait, and if Murray and his train be not already passed by, we shall soon see trace of them, unless some new purpose shall have altered their resolution. For in these blessed days no man, were he the nearest the throne, as the Earl of Murray may be, knows when he lays his head on his pillow at night where it is to lie upon the following even." They paused accordingly and sat down, the pedlar cautiously using for a seat the box which contained his treasures, and not concealing from his companion that he wore under his cloak a pistolet hanging at his belt in case of need. He was courteous, however, and offered Halbert a share of the provisions which he carried about him for refreshment. They were of the coarsest kind, oak bread baked in cakes, oatmeal slaked with cold water, an onion or two, and a morsel of smoked ham completed the feast. But such as it was, no Scotsman of the time, had his rank been much higher than that of Glendinning, would have refused to share in it, especially as the pedlar produced, with a mysterious air, a tup's horn, which he carried slung from his shoulders, and which, when its contents were examined, produced to each party a clam-shell full of excellent usquebaugh, a liquor strange to Halbert, for the strong waters known in the south of Scotland came from France, and in fact such were but rarely used. The pedlar recommended it as excellent, said he had procured it in his last visit to the Braes of Doune, where he had securely traded under the safe conduct of the Laird of Buchanan. He also set an example to Halbert, by devoutly emptying the cup to the speedy downfall of Antichrist. Their conviviality was scarce ended, ere a rising dust was seen on the road of which they commanded the prospect, and half a score of horsemen were dimly descried, advancing at considerable speed, their casques glancing, and the points of their spears twinkling as they caught a glimpse of the sun. "These," said the pedlar, "must be the outscorers of Murray's party. Let us lie down in the peat hag, and keep ourselves out of sight." "And why so?" said Halbert. "Let us rather go down and make a signal to them." "God forbid," replied the pedlar. "Do you ken so ill the customs of our Scottish nation? That plump of spears that are spurring on so fast are doubtless commanded by some wild kinsmen of Morton, or some such daring fear-nothing as neither regards God nor man. It is their business, if they meet with any enemies, to pick quarrels and clear the way of them. And the chief knows nothing of what happens. Coming up with his more discreet and moderate friends, it may be a full mile in the rear. Were we to go near these lads of the Laird's Belt, your letter would do you little good, and my pack would do me muckle black ill. They would tirl every steek of claithes from our back, fling us into a moss hag with a stone at our heels, naked as the hour that brought us into this cumbered and sinful world, and neither Murray nor any other man ever the wiser. But if he did come to ken of it, what might he help it? It would be accounted a mere mistake, and there were all the moan made. O credit me, youth, that when men draw cold steel on each other in their native country, they neither can nor may dwell deeply on the offences of those whose swords are useful to them. They suffered, therefore, the vanguard, as it might be termed, of the Earl of Murray's host to pass forward, and it was not long until a denser cloud of dust began to arise to the northward. "Now," said the pedlar, "let us hurry down the hill, for to tell the truth," said he, dragging Halbert along earnestly, "a Scottish noble's march is like a serpent. The head is furnished with fangs, and the tail hath its sting. The only harmless point of access is the main body." "I will hasten as fast as you," said the youth, "but tell me why the rearward of such an army should be as dangerous as the van." "Because, as the vanguard consists of their picked wild desperates, resolute for mischief, such as neither fear God nor regard their fellow creatures, but understand themselves bound to hurry from the road whatever is displeasing to themselves, so the rear guard consists of misproud serving men, who, being in charge of the baggage, take care to amend by their exactions upon travelling merchants and others, their own thefts on their master's property. You will hear the advanced enfants perdus, as the French call them, and so they are indeed, namely, children of the fall, singing unclean and fulsome ballads of sin and harlotry. And then will come on the middle ward, when you will hear the canticles and psalms sung by the reforming nobles, and the gentry, and honest and pious clergy, by whom they are accompanied. And last of all, you will find in the rear a legend of godless lackeys, palfreniers, and horseboys, talking of nothing but dicing, drinking, and drabbing." As the pedlar spoke, they had reached the side of the highroad, and Murray's main body was in sight, consisting of about 300 horse, marching with great regularity, and in a closely compacted body. Some of the troopers wore the liveries of their masters, but this was not common. Most of them were dressed in such colours as chance dictated, but the majority being clad in blue cloth, and the whole armed with cuirass and backplate, with sleeves of mail, gauntlets and poldroons, and either mailed hose or strong jack-boots, they had something of a uniform appearance. Many of the leaders were clad in complete armour, and all in a certain half-military dress, which no man of quality in those disturbed times ever felt himself sufficiently safe to abandon. The foremost of this party immediately rode up to the pedlar and to Halbert Glendinning, and demanded of them who they were. The pedlar told his story, the young Glendinning exhibited his letter, which a gentleman carried to Murray. In an instant after, the word halt was given through the squadron, and at once the onward heavy tramp, which seemed the most distinctive attribute of the body, ceased, and was heard no more. The command was announced that the troop should halt here for an hour to refresh themselves and their horses. The pedlar was assured of safe protection, and accommodated with the use of a baggage horse, but at the same time he was ordered into the rear, a command which he reluctantly obeyed, and not without wringing pathetically the hand of Halbert as he separated from him. The young heir of Glendearg was in the meanwhile conducted to a plot of ground more raised, and therefore drier than the rest of the moor. Here a carpet was flung on the ground by way of tablecloth, and around it sat the leaders of the party, partaking of an entertainment as coarse with relation to their rank as that which Glendinning had so lately shared. Murray himself rose as he came forward, and advanced a step to meet him. This celebrated person had in his appearance as well as in his mind much of the admirable qualities of James V., his father. Had not the stain of illegitimacy rested upon his birth, he would have filled the Scottish throne with as much honour as any of the Stuart race. But history, while she acknowledges his high talents, and much that was princely, nay royal, in his conduct, cannot forget that ambition led him farther than honour or loyalty warranted. Brave amongst the bravest, fair in presence and in favour, skilful to manage the most intricate affairs, to attach himself to those who were doubtful, to stun and overwhelm by the suddenness and intrepidity of his enterprises those who were resolute in resistance, he attained, and as to personal merit certainly deserved, the highest place in the kingdom. But he abused, under the influence of strong temptation, the opportunities which his sister Mary's misfortunes and imprudence threw in his way. He supplanted his sovereign and benefactress in her power, and his history affords us one of those mixed characters, in which principle was so often sacrificed to policy, that we must condemn the statesman, while we pity and regret the individual. Many events in his life gave likelihood to the charge that he himself aimed at the crown, and it is too true that he countenanced the fatal expedient of establishing an English, that is, a foreign and a hostile interest, in the councils of Scotland. But his death may be received as an atonement for his offences, and may serve to show how much more safe is the person of a real patriot than that of the mere head of a faction, who is accounted answerable for the offences of his meanest attendants. When Murray approached, the young rustic was naturally abashed at the dignity of his presence. The commanding form and the countenance to which high and important thoughts were familiar, the features which bore the resemblance of Scotland's long line of kings, were well calculated to impress awe and reverence. His dress had little to distinguish him from the high-born nobles and barons by whom he was attended. A buff coat, richly embroidered with silken lace, supplied the place of armour, and a massive gold chain, with its medal, hung round his neck. His black velvet bonnet was decorated with a string of large and fair pearls, and with a small tufted feather. A long heavy sword was girt to his side, as the familiar companion of his hand. He wore gilded spurs on his boots, and these completed his equipment. "This letter," he said, "is from the godly preacher of the Word, Henry Warden, young man. Is it not so?" Halbert answered in the affirmative. "And he writes to us, it would seem, in some strait, and refers us to you for the circumstances. Let us know, I pray you, how things stand with him." In some perturbation, Halbert Glendinning gave an account of the circumstances which had accompanied the preacher's imprisonment. When he came to the discussion of the handfasting engagement, he was struck with the ominous and displeased expression of Murray's brows, and, contrary to all prudential and politic rule, seeing something was wrong, yet not well aware what that something was, had almost stopped short in his narrative. "What ails the fool?" said the Earl, drawing his dark red eyebrows together, while the same dusky glow kindled on his brow. "Hast thou not learned to tell a true tale without stammering?" "So please you," answered Halbert, with considerable address, "I have never before spoken in such a presence." "He seems a modest youth," said Murray, turning to his next attendant, "and yet one who in a good cause will neither fear friend nor foe. Speak on, friend, and speak freely." Halbert then gave an account of the quarrel betwixt Julian Avenel and the preacher, which the Earl, biting his lip the while, compelled himself to listen to as a thing of indifference. At first he appeared even to take the part of the Baron. "Henry Warden," he said, "is too hot in his zeal. The law both of God and man maketh allowance for certain alliances, though not strictly formal, and the issue of such may succeed." This general declaration he expressed, accompanying it with a glance around upon the few followers who were present at this interview. The most of them answered, "There is no contravening that." But one or two looked on the ground, and were silent. Murray then turned again to Glendinning, commanding him to say what next chanced, and not to omit any particular. When he mentioned the manner in which Julian had cast from him his concubine, Murray drew a deep breath, set his teeth hard, and laid his hand on the hilt of his dagger. Casting his eyes once more around the circle, which was now augmented by one or two of the reformed preachers, he seemed to devour his rage in silence, and again commanded Halbert to proceed. When he came to describe how Warden had been dragged to a dungeon, the Earl seemed to have found the point at which he might give vent to his own resentment, secure of the sympathy and approbation of all who were present. "Judge you," he said, looking to those around him, "judge you, my peers, and noble gentlemen of Scotland, betwixt me and this Julian Avenel, he hath broken his own word, and hath violated my safe conduct. He hath put his hand forth upon a preacher of the gospel, and perchance may sell his blood to the worshippers of Antichrist." "Let him die the death of a traitor," said the secular chiefs, "and let his tongue be struck through with the hangman's fiery iron to avenge his perjury." "Let him go down to his place with Baal's priests," said the preachers, "and be his ashes cast into Tophet." Murray heard them with the smile of expected revenge. Yet it is probable that the brutal treatment of the female, whose circumstances somewhat resembled those of the Earl's own mother, had its share in the grim smile which curled his sunburnt cheek and its haughty lip. To Halbert Glendinning, when his narrative was finished, he spoke with great kindness. "He is a bold and gallant youth," said he to those around, "and formed of the stuff which becomes a bustling time. There are periods when men's spirits shine bravely through them. I will know something more of him." He questioned him more particularly concerning the Baron of Avenel's probable forces, the strength of his castle, the dispositions of his next heir, and this brought necessarily forward the sad history of his brother's daughter, Mary Avenel, which was told with an embarrassment that did not escape Murray. "Ha! Julian Avenel," he said, "and do you provoke my resentment, when you have so much more reason to deprecate my justice? I knew Walter Avenel, a true Scotsman and a good soldier. Our sister, the Queen, must right his daughter, and were her land restored, she would be a fitting bride to some brave man who may better merit our favour than the traitor Julian." Then looking at Halbert, he said, "Art thou of gentle blood, young man?" Halbert, with a faltering and uncertain voice, began to speak of his distant pretensions to claim a descent from the ancient Glendonwines of Galloway, when Murray interrupted him with a smile. "Nay, nay, leave pedigrees to bards and heralds. In our days each man is the son of his own deeds. The glorious light of Reformation hath shone alike on prince and peasant, and peasant as well as prince may be illustrated by fighting in its defence. It is a stirring world, where all may advance themselves who have stout hearts and strong arms. Tell me frankly while thou hast left thy father's house." Halbert Glendinning made a frank confession of his duel with Piercie Shafton, and mentioned his supposed death. "By my hand," said Murray, "thou art a bold sparrowhawk, to match thee so early with such a kite as Piercie Shafton. Queen Elizabeth would give her glove filled with gold crowns to know that meddling coxcomb to be under the sod. Would she not, Morton?" "Ay, by my word, and esteem her glove a better gift than the crowns," replied Morton, "which few border lads like this fellow will esteem just valuation." "But what shall we do with this young homicide?" said Murray. "What will our preachers say?" "Tell them of Moses and of Benaiah," said Morton. "It is but the smiting of an Egyptian when all is said out." "Let it be so," said Murray, laughing, "but we will bury the tale, as the prophet did the body, in the sand. I will take care of this swanky. Be near to us, Glendinning, since that is thy name. We retain thee as a squire of our household. The master of our horse will see thee fully equipped and armed." During the expedition which he was now engaged in, Murray found several opportunities of putting Glendinning's courage and presence of mind to the test, and he began to rise so rapidly in his esteem, that those who knew the Earl considered the youth's fortune as certain. One step only was wanting to raise him to a still higher degree of confidence and favour. It was the abjuration of the popish religion. The ministers who attended upon Murray and formed his chief support amongst the people found an easy convert in Halbert Glendinning, who, from his earliest days, had never felt much devotion towards the Catholic faith, and who listened eagerly to more reasonable views of religion. By thus adopting the faith of his master, he rose higher in his favour, and was constantly about his person during his prolonged stay in the west of Scotland, which the intractability of those whom the Earl had to deal with protracted from day to day and week to week. End of chapter 35. Chapter 36, Part A, of The Monastery by Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 36, Part A. Faint the din of battle brayed, distant down the hollow wind. War and terror fled before, wounds and death were left behind. Penrose. The autumn of the year was well advanced, when the Earl of Morton, one morning, rather unexpectedly, entered the antechamber of Murray, in which Halbert Glendinning was in waiting. "Call your master, Halbert," said the Earl. "I have news for him from Teviotdale, and for you too, Glendinning. News! News, my Lord of Murray!" he exclaimed at the door of the Earl's bedroom. "Come forth instantly." The Earl appeared and greeted his ally, demanding eagerly his tidings. "I have had a sure friend with me from the south," said Morton. "He has been at St. Mary's Monastery, and brings important tidings." "Of what complexion?" said Murray, "and can you trust the bearer?" "He is faithful on my life," said Morton. "I wish all around your lordship may prove equally so." "At what and whom do you point?" demanded Murray. "Here is the Egyptian of trusty Halbert Glendinning, our Southland Moses, come alive again, and flourishing, gay and bright as ever, in that Teviotdale Goshen, the Halidome of Kennaquhair." "What mean you, my lord?" said Murray. "Only that your new henchman has put a false tale upon you. Piercie Shafton is alive and well, by the same token that the gull is thought to be detained there by love to a miller's daughter, who roamed the country with him in disguise." "Glendinning," said Murray, bending his brow to his darkest frown, "thou hast not, I trust, dared to bring me a lie in thy mouth, in order to win my confidence." "My lord," said Halbert, "I am incapable of a lie. I should choke on one were my life to require that I pronounced it. I say, that this sword of my father was through the body, the point came out behind his back, the hilt pressed upon his breastbone, and I will plunge it as deep in the body of any one who shall dare to charge me with falsehood." "How, fellow?" said Morton. "Wouldst thou beard a nobleman?" "Be silent, Halbert," said Murray, "and you, my Lord of Morton, forbear him. I see truth written on his brow." "I wish the inside of the manuscript may correspond with the superscription," replied his more suspicious ally. "Look to it, my lord. You will one day lose your life by too much confidence." "And you will lose your friends by being too readily suspicious," answered Murray. "Enough of this. Let me hear thy tidings." "Sir John Foster," said Morton, "is about to send a party into Scotland to waste the Halidome." "How? Without waiting my presence and permission?" said Murray. "He is mad. Will he come as an enemy into the Queen's country?" "He has Elizabeth's express orders," answered Morton, "and they are not to be trifled with. Indeed, his march has been more than once projected and laid aside during the time we have been here, and has caused much alarm at Kennaquhair. Boniface, the old abbot, has resigned, and whom do you think they have chosen in his place?" "No one, surely," said Murray. "They would presume to hold no election until the Queen's pleasure and mine were known." Morton shrugged his shoulders. "They have chosen the pupil of old Cardinal Beaton, that wily, determined champion of Rome, the bosom friend of our busy primate of St. Andrews. Eustace, late the sub-prior of Kennaquhair, is now its abbot, and like a second Pope Julius, is levying men and making musters to fight with Foster if he comes forward." "We must prevent that meeting," said Murray hastily. "Whichever party wins the day, it were a fatal encounter for us. Who commands the troop of the Abbot?" "Our faithful old friend, Julian Avenel, nothing less," answered Morton. "Glendinning," said Murray, "sound trumpets to horse directly, and let all who love us get on horseback without delay. Yes, my lord, this were indeed a fatal dilemma. If we take part with our English friends, the country will cry shame on us. The very old wives will attack us with their rocks and spindles. the very stones of the street will rise up against us. We cannot set our face to such a deed of infamy. And my sister, whose confidence I already have such difficulty in preserving, will altogether withdraw it from me. Then, were we to oppose the English warden, Elizabeth would call it a protecting of her enemies, and what not, and we should lose her." "The she-dragon," said Morton, "is the best card in our pack, and yet I would not willingly stand still and see English blades carve Scots flesh. What say you to loitering by the way, marching far and easy for fear of spoiling our horses? They might then fight dog, fight bull, fight abbot, fight archer, and no one would blame us for what chanced when we were not present." "All would blame us, James Douglas," replied Murray. "We should lose both sides. We had better advance with the utmost celerity, and do what we can to keep the peace between them. I would the nag that brought Piercie Shafton hither had broken his neck over the highest hooch in Northumberland. He is a proper coxcomb to make all this bustle about, and to occasion perhaps a national war." "Had we known in time," said Douglas, "we might have had him privily waited upon as he entered the borders. There are strapping lads enough would have rid us of him for the lucre of his spur-whang. Footnote: spur-whang, spur leather. End footnote. But to the saddle, James Stewart, since so the phrase goes. I hear your trumpets. Bound to horse and away. We shall soon see which nag is best breathed." Followed by a train of about 300 well-mounted men at arms, these two powerful barons directed their course to Dumfries, and from thence eastward to Teviotdale, marching at a rate which, as Morton had foretold, soon disabled a good many of their horses, so that when they approached the scene of expected action, there were not above 200 of their train remaining in a body, and of those, most were mounted on steeds which had been sorely jaded. They had hitherto been amused and agitated by various reports concerning the advance of the English soldiers, and the degree of resistance which the Abbot was able to oppose to them. But when they were 6 or 7 miles from St. Mary's of Kennaquhair, a gentleman of the country, whom Murray had summoned to attend him, and on whose intelligence he knew he could rely, arrived at the head of 2 or 3 servants, bloody with spurring, fiery red with haste. According to his report, Sir John Foster, after several times announcing, and as often delaying, his intended incursion, had at last been so stung with the news that Piercie Shafton was openly residing within the Halidome, that he determined to execute the commands of his mistress, which directed him at every risk to make himself master of the Euphuist's person. The Abbot's unceasing exertions had collected a body of men almost equal in number to those of the English warden, but less practised in arms. They were united under the command of Julian Avenel, and it was apprehended they would join battle upon the banks of a small stream which forms the verge of the Halidome. "Who knows the place?" said Murray. "I do, my lord," answered Glendinning. "'Tis well," said the Earl. "Take a score of the best mounted horse, make what haste thou canst, and announce to them that I am coming up instantly with a strong power, and will cut to pieces, without mercy, whichever party strikes the first blow. Davison," said he to the gentleman who brought the intelligence, "thou shalt be my guide. Hie thee on, Glendinning. Say to Foster, I conjure him, as he respects his mistress's service, that he will leave the matter in my hands. Say to the Abbot, I will burn the monastery over his head, if he strikes a stroke till I come. Tell the dog Julian Avenel that he hath already one deep score to settle with me. I will set his head on the top of the highest pinnacle of St. Mary's, if he presume to open another. Make haste, and spare not the spur for fear of spoiling horseflesh." "Your bidding shall be obeyed, my lord," said Glendinning, and choosing those whose horses were in best plight to be his attendants, he went off as fast as the jaded state of their cavalry permitted. Hill and hollow vanished from under the feet of the chargers. They had not ridden half the way, when they met stragglers coming off from the field, whose appearance announced that the conflict was begun. 2 supported in their arms a third, their elder brother, who was pierced with an arrow through the body. Halbert, who knew them to belong to the Halidome, called them by their names, and questioned them of the state of the affray. But just then, in spite of their efforts to retain him in the saddle, their brother dropped from the horse, and they dismounted in haste to receive his last breath. From men thus engaged, no information was to be obtained. Glendinning therefore pushed on with his little troop, the more anxiously, as he perceived other stragglers bearing St. Andrew's cross upon their caps and corslets, flying apparently from the field of battle. Most of these, when they were aware of a body of horsemen approaching on the road, held to the one hand or the other, at such a distance as precluded coming to speech of them. Others, whose fear was more intense, kept the onward road, galloping wildly as fast as their horses could carry them, and when questioned, only glared without reply on those who spoke to them, and rode on without drawing bridle. Several of these were also known to Halbert, who had therefore no doubt, from the circumstances in which he met them, that the men of the Halidome were defeated. He became now unspeakably anxious concerning the fate of his brother, who, he could not doubt, must have been engaged in the affray. He therefore increased the speed of his horse, so that not above 5 or 6 of his followers could keep up with him. At length he reached a little hill, at the descent of which, surrounded by a semicircular sweep of a small stream, lay the plain which had been the scene of the skirmish. It was a melancholy spectacle. War and terror, to use the expression of the poet, had rushed on to the field and left only wounds and death behind them. The battle had been stoutly contested, as was almost always the case with these border skirmishes, where ancient hatred and mutual injuries made men stubborn in maintaining the cause of their conflict. Towards the middle of the plain, there lay the bodies of several men who had fallen in the very act of grappling with the enemy, and there were seen countenances which still bore the stern expression of unextinguishable hate and defiance, hands which clasped the hilt of the broken falchion, or strove in vain to pluck the deadly arrow from the wound. Some were wounded, and cowed of the courage they had lately shown, were begging aid, and craving water, in a tone of melancholy depression, while others tried to teach the faltering tongue to pronounce some half-forgotten prayer, which even when first learned, they had but half understood. Halbert, uncertain what course he was next to pursue, rode through the plain to see if among the dead or wounded he could discover any traces of his brother Edward. He experienced no interruption from the English. A distant cloud of dust announced that they were still pursuing the scattered fugitives, and he guessed that to approach them with his followers, until they were again under some command, would be to throw away his own life and that of his men, whom the victors would instantly confound with the Scots, against whom they had been successful. He resolved, therefore, to pause until Murray came up with his forces, to which he was the more readily moved, as he heard the trumpets of the English warden sounding the retreat, and recalling from the pursuit. He drew his men together, and made a stand in an advantageous spot of ground, which had been occupied by the Scots in the beginning of the action, and most fiercely disputed while the skirmish lasted. While he stood here, Halbert's ear was assailed by the feeble moan of a woman, which he had not expected to hear amid that scene, until the retreat of the foes had permitted the relations of the slain to approach, for the purpose of paying them the last duties. He looked with anxiety, and at length observed, that by the body of a knight in bright armour, whose crest, though soiled and broken, still showed the marks of rank and birth, there sat a female wrapped in a horseman's cloak, and holding something pressed against her bosom, which he soon discovered to be a child. He glanced towards the English. They advanced not, and the continued and prolonged sound of their trumpets, with the shouts of the leaders, announced that their powers would not be instantly reassembled. He had, therefore, a moment to look after this unfortunate woman. He gave his horse to a spearman as he dismounted, and, approaching the unhappy female, asked her, in the most soothing tone he could assume, whether he could assist her in her distress. The mourner made him no direct answer, but endeavouring with a trembling and unskilful hand to undo the springs of the visor and gorget, said in a tone of impatient grief, "Oh, he would recover instantly could I but give him air. Land and living, life and honour, would I give for the power of undoing these cruel iron platings that suffocate him. He that would soothe sorrow must not argue on the vanity of the most deceitful hopes. The body lay as that of one whose last draught of vital air had been drawn, and who must never more have concern with the nether sky." But Halbert Glendinning failed not to raise the visor, and cast loose the gorget, when, to his great surprise, he recognized the pale face of Julian Avenel. His last fight was over. The fierce and turbid spirit had departed in the strife in which it had so long delighted. "Alas, he is gone," said Halbert, speaking to the young woman, in whom he had now no difficulty of knowing the unhappy Catherine. End of chapter 36, Part A. Chapter 36, Part B of The Monastery by Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 36, Part B. "Oh, no, no, no," she reiterated. "Do not say so. He is not dead. He is but in a swoon. I have lain as long in one myself." And then his voice would arouse me, when he spoke kindly, and said, "Catherine, look up for my sake. And look up, Julian, for mine," she said, addressing the senseless corpse. "I know you do but counterfeit to frighten me, but I am not frightened," she added, with an hysterical attempt to laugh, and then instantly changing her tone, entreated him to speak were it but to curse my folly. "Oh, the rudest word you ever said to me would now sound like the dearest you wasted on me before I gave you all. Lift him up," she said, "lift him up, for God's sake. Have you no compassion? He promised to wed me if I bore him a boy, and this child is so like to its father. How shall he keep his word if you do not help me to awaken him? Christie of the Clinthill, Rowley, Hutcheon, ye were constant at his feast, but ye fled from him at the fray, false villains as ye are." "Not I, by heaven," said a dying man, who made some shift to raise himself on his elbow, and discovered to Halbert the well-known features of Christie. "I fled not a foot, and a man can but fight while his breath lasts. Mine is going fast. So, youngster," said he, looking at Glendinning and seeing his military dress, "thou hast ta'en the basnet at last? It is a better cap to live in than die in. I would chance had sent thy brother here instead. There was good in him, but thou art as wild, and wilt soon be as wicked as myself." "God forbid," said Halbert hastily. "Marry and amen, with all my heart," said the wounded man. "There will be company enow without thee where I am going. But God be praised I had no hand in that wickedness," said he, looking to poor Catherine, and with some exclamation in his mouth, that sounded betwixt a prayer and a curse, the soul of Christie of the Clinthill took wing to the last account. Deeply wrapt in the painful interest which these shocking events had excited, Glendinning forgot for a moment his own situation and duties, and was first recalled to them by a trampling of horse, and the cry of St. George for England, which the English soldiers still continued to use. His handful of men, for most of the stragglers had waited for Murray's coming up, remained on horseback, holding their lances upright, having no command either to submit or resist. "There stands our captain," said one of them, as a strong party of English came up, the vanguard of Foster's troop. "Your captain, with his sword sheathed, and on foot in the presence of his enemy? A raw soldier, I warrant him," said the English leader. "So, ho! Young man, is your dream out, and will you now answer me if you will fight or fly?" "Neither," answered Halbert Glendinning with great tranquillity. "Then throw down thy sword and yield thee," answered the Englishman. "Not till I can help myself no otherwise," said Halbert, with the same moderation of tone and manner. "Art thou for thine own hand, friend, or to whom dost thou owe service?" demanded the English captain. "To the noble Earl of Murray." "Then thou servest," said the Southron, "the most disloyal nobleman who breathes, false both to England and Scotland." "Thou liest," said Glendinning, regardless of all consequences. "Ha! Art thou so hot, how, and wert so cold but a minute since? I lie, do I? Wilt thou do battle with me on that quarrel?" "With 1 to 1, 1 to 2, or 2 to 5, as you list," said Halbert Glendinning. "Grant me but a fair field." "That thou shalt have. Stand back, my mates," said the brave Englishman. "If I fall, give him fair play, and let him go off free with his people." "Long life to the noble captain!" cried the soldiers, as impatient to see the duel as if it had been a bull baiting. "He will have a short life of it, though," said the sergeant, "if he, an old man of 60, is to fight, for any reason, or for no reason, with every man he meets, and especially the young fellows he might be father to. And here comes the warden besides, to see the sword play." In fact, Sir John Foster came up with a considerable body of his horsemen, just as his captain, whose age rendered him unequal to the combat with so strong and active a youth as Glendinning, was deprived of his sword. "Take it up for shame, old Stawarth Bolton," said the English warden. "And thou, young man, tell me who and what thou art." "A follower of the Earl of Murray, who bore his will to your honour," answered Glendinning, "but here he comes to say it himself. I see the van of his horsemen come over the hills." "Get into order, my masters," said Sir John Foster to his followers. "You that have broken your spears, draw your swords. We are something unprovided for a second field, but if yonder dark cloud on the hill edge bring us foul weather, we must bear as bravely as our broken cloaks will bide it. Meanwhile, Stalworth, we have got the deer we have hunted for. Here is Piercie Shafton, hard and fast betwixt two troopers." "Who, that lad?" said Bolton. "He is no more Piercie Shafton than I am. He hath his gay cloak, indeed, but Piercie Shafton is a round dozen of years older than that slip of roguery. I have known him since he was thus high. Did you never see him in the tilt yard, or in the presence?" "To the devil with such vanities," said Sir John Foster. "When had I leisure for them or anything else? During my whole life has she kept me to this hangman's office, chasing thieves one day and traitors another, in daily fear of my life, the lance never hung up in the hall, the foot never out of the stirrup, the saddles never off my nags' backs. And now, because I have been mistaken in the person of a man I never saw, I warrant me, the next letters from the Privy Council will rate me as I were a dog. A man were better dead than thus slaved and harassed." And a Scottish pursuivant who attended declared that the noble Earl of Murray desired, in all honour and safety, a personal conference with Sir John Foster, midway between their parties, with 6 of company in each, and 10 free minutes to come and go. "And now," said the Englishman, "comes another plague. I must go speak with yonder false Scot, and he knows how to frame his devices, to cast dust in the eyes of a plain man, as well as ever a knave in the north. I am no match for him in words, and for hard blows we are but too ill provided. Pursuivant, we grant the conference, and you, Sir Swordsman," speaking to young Glendinning, "draw off with your troopers to your own party. March, attend your Earl's trumpet. Stalworth Bolton, put our troops in order, and be ready to move forward at the wagging of a finger. Get you gone to your own friends, I tell you, Sir Squire, and loiter not here." Notwithstanding this peremptory order, Halbert Glendinning could not help stopping to cast a look upon the unfortunate Catherine, who lay insensible of the danger and of the trampling of so many horses around her, insensible, as the second glance assured him, of all and forever. Glendinning almost rejoiced when he saw that the last misery of life was over, and that the hoofs of the war horses, amongst which he was compelled to leave her, could only injure and deface a senseless corpse. He caught the infant from her arms, half ashamed of the shout of laughter which rose on all sides, at seeing an armed man in such a situation assume such an unwonted and inconvenient burden. "Shoulder your infant," cried a harquebusier. "Port your infant," said a pikeman. "Peace, ye brutes," said Stalworth Bolton, "and respect humanity in others if you have none in yourselves. I pardon the lad having done some discredit to my grey hairs, when I see him take care of that helpless creature, which ye would have trampled upon as if ye had been littered of bitch wolves, not born of women." While this passed, the leaders on either side met in the neutral space betwixt the forces of either, and the Earl accosted the English warden. "Is this fair or honest usage, Sir John? Or for whom do you hold the Earl of Morton and myself, that you ride in Scotland with a rayed banner, fight, slay, and make prisoners at your own pleasure? Is it well done, think you, to spoil our land and shed our blood, after the many proofs we have given to your mistress of our devotion due to her will, saving always the allegiance due to our own sovereign?" "My Lord of Murray," answered Foster, "all the world knows you to be a man of quick engine and deep wisdom, and these several weeks you have held me in hand with promising to arrest my sovereign mistress's rebel, this Piercie Shafton of Wilverton, and you have never kept your word, alleging turmoils in the west, and I wot not what other causes of hindrance. Now, since he has had the insolence to return hither, and live openly within 10 miles of England, I could no longer, in plain duty to my mistress and queen, tarry upon your successive delays, and therefore I have used her force to take her rebel by the strong hand wherever I can find him." "And is Piercie Shafton in your hands, then?" said the Earl of Murray. "Be aware that I may not, without my own great shame, suffer you to remove him hence without doing battle." "Will you, Lord Earl, after all the advantages you have received at the hands of the Queen of England, do battle in the cause of her rebel?" said Sir John Foster. "Not so, Sir John," answered the Earl, "but I will fight to the death in defence of the liberties of our free kingdom of Scotland." "By my faith," said Sir John Foster, "I am well content. My sword is not blunted with all it has done yet this day." "By my honour, Sir John," said Sir George Heron of Chipchase, "there is but little reason we should fight these Scottish lords even now, for I hold opinion with old Stawarth Bolton, and believe yonder prisoner to be no more Piercie Shafton than he is the Earl of Northumberland. And you were but ill advised to break the peace betwixt the countries for a prisoner of less consequence than that gay mischief maker." "Sir George," replied Foster, "I have often heard you herons are afraid of hawks. Nay, lay not hand on sword, man. I did but jest. And for this prisoner, let him be brought up hither, that we may see who or what he is. Always under assurance, my lords," he continued, addressing the Scots. "Upon our word and honour," said Morton, "we will offer no violence." The laugh turned against Sir John Foster considerably, when the prisoner, being brought up, proved not only a different person from Sir Piercie Shafton, but a female in man's attire. "Pluck the mantle from the Queen's face, and cast her to the horse boys," said Foster. "She has kept such company ere now, I warrant." Even Murray was moved to laughter, no common thing with him, at the disappointment of the English warden. But he would not permit any violence to be offered to the fair Molinara, who had thus a second time rescued Sir Piercie Shafton at her own personal risk. "You have already done more mischief than you can well answer," said the Earl to the English warden, "and it were dishonour to me should I permit you to harm a hair of this young woman's head." "My lord," said Morton, "if Sir John will ride apart with me but for one moment, I will show him such reasons as shall make him content to depart, and to refer this unhappy day's work to the judgment of the commissioners nominated to try offences on the border." He then led Sir John Foster aside, and spoke to him in this manner: "Sir John Foster, I much marvel that a man who knows your Queen Elizabeth as you do, should not know that, if you hope anything from her, it must be for doing her useful service, not for involving her in quarrels with her neighbours without any advantage. Sir Knight, I will speak frankly what I know to be true. Had you seized the true Piercie Shafton by this ill-advised inroad, and had your deed threatened, as most likely it might, a breach betwixt the countries, your politic princess and her politic council would rather have disgraced Sir John Foster than entered into war on his behalf. But now that you have stricken short of your aim, you may rely on it you will have little thanks for carrying the matter farther. I will work thus far on the Earl of Murray, that he will undertake to dismiss Sir Piercie Shafton from the realm of Scotland. Be well advised, and let the matter now pass off. You will gain nothing by farther violence, for if we fight, you, as the fewer and the weaker through your former action, will needs have the worse." Sir John Foster listened with his head declining on his breastplate. "It is a cursed chance," he said, "and I shall have little thanks for my day's work." He then rode up to Murray, and said that, in deference to his lordship's presence and that of my Lord of Morton, he had come to the resolution of withdrawing himself, with his power, without farther proceedings. "Stop there, Sir John Foster," said Murray. "I cannot permit you to retire in safety, unless you leave some one who may be surety to Scotland, that the injuries you have at present done us may be fully accounted for. You will reflect that by permitting your retreat, I become accountable to my sovereign, who will demand a reckoning of me for the blood of her subjects, if I suffer those who shed it to depart so easily." "It shall never be told in England," said the Warden, "that John Foster gave pledges like a subdued man, and that on the very field on which he stands victorious. But," he added after a moment's pause, "if Stawarth Bolton wills to abide with you on his own free choice, I will say nothing against it, and as I bethink me, it were better he should stay to see the dismissal of this same Piercie Shafton. I receive him as your hostage, nevertheless, and shall treat him as such," said the Earl of Murray. But Foster, turning away as if to give directions to Bolton and his men, affected not to hear this observation. "There rides a faithful servant of his most beautiful and sovereign lady," said Murray aside to Morton. "Happy man! He knows not whether the execution of her commands may not cost him his head, and yet he is most certain that to leave them unexecuted will bring disgrace and death without reprieve. Happy are they who are not only subjected to the caprices of Dame Fortune, but held bound to account and be responsible for them, and that to a sovereign as moody and fickle as her humorous ladyship herself." "We also have a female sovereign, my lord," said Morton. "We have so, Douglas," said the Earl, with a suppressed sigh, "but it remains to be seen how long a female hand can hold the reins of power in a realm so wild as ours. We will now go on to St. Mary's, and see ourselves after the state of that house. Glendinning, look to that woman, and protect her. What the fiend, man, hast thou got in thine arms? An infant, as I live! Where couldst thou find such a charge at such a place and moment?" Halbert Glendinning briefly told the story. The Earl rode forward to the place where the body of Julian Avenel lay, with his unhappy companion's arms wrapped around him, like the trunk of an uprooted oak borne down by the tempest with all its ivy garlands. Both were cold dead. Murray was touched in an unwonted degree, remembering perhaps his own birth. "What have they to answer for, Douglas," he said, "who thus abuse the sweetest gifts of affection?" The Earl of Morton, unhappy in his marriage, was a libertine in his amours. "You must ask that question of Henry Warden, my lord, or of John Knox. I am but a wild counsellor in women's matters." "Forward to St. Mary's," said the Earl. "Pass the word on. Glendinning, give the infant to this same female cavalier, and let it be taken charge of. Let no dishonour be done to the dead bodies, and call on the country to bury or remove them. Forward, I say, my masters." End of chapter 36, Part B. Chapter 37, Part A of the Monastery by Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 37, Part A. Gone to be married? Gone to swear a peace. King John. The news of the lost battle, so quickly carried by the fugitives to the village and convent, had spread the greatest alarm among the inhabitants. The sacristan and other monks counselled flight. The treasurer recommended that the church plate should be offered as tribute to the bribe of the English officer. The abbot alone was unmoved and undaunted. "My brethren," he said, "since God has not given our people victory in the combat, it must be because he requires of us, his spiritual soldiers, to fight the good fight of martyrdom, a conflict in which nothing but our own faint-hearted cowardice can make us fail of victory. Let us assume, then, the armour of faith, and prepare, if it be necessary, to die under the ruin of these shrines, to the service of which we have devoted ourselves. Highly honoured are we all in this distinguished summons, from our dear brother Nicholas, whose grey hairs have been preserved until they should be surrounded by the crown of martyrdom, down to my beloved son Edward, who, arriving at the vineyard at the latest hour of the day, is yet permitted to share its toils with those who have laboured from the morning. Be of good courage, my children. I dare not, like my sainted predecessors, promise to you that you shall be preserved by miracle. I and you are alike unworthy of that especial interposition, which in earlier times turned the sword of sacrilege against the bosom of tyrants by whom it was wielded, daunted the hardened hearts of heretics with prodigies, and called down hosts of angels to defend the shrine of God and of the Virgin. Yet, by heavenly aid, you shall this day see that your father and abbot will not disgrace the mitre which sits upon his brow. Go to yourselves, my children, and exercise your private devotions. Array yourselves also in alb and cope, as for our most solemn festivals, and be ready, when the tolling of the largest bell announces the approach of the enemy, to march forth to meet them in solemn procession. Let the church be opened to afford such refuge as may be to those of our vassals, who from their exertion in this day's unhappy battle, or the cause, are particularly apprehensive of the rage of the enemy. Tell Sir Piercie Shafton, if he has escaped the fight—" "I am here, most venerable Abbot," replied Sir Piercie, "and if it so seemeth meet to you, I will presently assemble such of the men as have escaped this escaramouche, and will renew the resistance, even unto the death. Certes, you will learn from all, that I did my part in this unhappy matter. Had it pleased Julian Avenel to have attended to my counsel, especially in somewhat withdrawing of his main battle, even as you may have marked the heron eschew the stoop of the falcon, receiving him rather upon his beak than upon his wing, affairs, as I do conceive, might have had a different face, and we might then, in a more bellicose manner, have maintained that affray. Nevertheless, I would not be understood to speak anything in disregard of Julian Avenel, whom I saw fall fighting manfully with his face to his enemy, which hath banished from my memory the unseemly term of meddling coxcomb, with which it pleased him something rashly to qualify my advice, and for which, had it pleased Heaven and the saints to have prolonged the life of that excellent person, I had it bound upon my soul to have put him to death with my own hand." "Sir Piercie," said the Abbot at length interrupting him, "our time allows brief leisure to speak what might have been." "You are right, most venerable lord and father," replied the incorrigible Euphuist. "The preterite, as grammarians have it, concerns frail mortality less than the future mood, and indeed our cogitations respect chiefly the present. In a word, I am willing to head all who will follow me, and offer such opposition as manhood and mortality may permit, to the advance of the English, though they be my own countrymen. And be assured, Piercie Shafton will measure his length, being 5 feet 10 inches, on the ground as he stands, rather than give 2 yards and retreat, according to the usual motion in which we retrograde." "I thank you, Sir Knight," said the Abbot, "and I doubt not that you would make your words good. But it is not the will of Heaven that carnal weapons should rescue us. We are called to endure, not to resist, and may not waste the blood of our innocent commons in vain. Fruitless opposition becomes not men of our profession. They have my commands to resign the sword and the spear. God and Our Lady have not blessed our banner." "Bethink you, reverend lord," said Piercie Shafton very eagerly, "ere you resign the defence that is in your power. There are many posts near the entry of this village, where brave men might live or die to the advantage, and I have this additional motive to make defence, the safety, namely, of a fair friend, who, I hope, hath escaped the hands of the heretics." "I understand you, Sir Piercie," said the Abbot. "You mean the daughter of our convent's miller?" "Reverend my lord," said Sir Piercie, not without hesitation, "the fair Mysinda is, as may be in some sort alleged, the daughter of one who mechanically prepareth corn to be manipulated into bread, without which we could not exist, and which is therefore an employment in itself honourable, nay, necessary. Nevertheless, if the purest sentiments of a generous mind, streaming forth like the rays of the sun reflected by a diamond, may ennoble one, who is in some sort the daughter of a molendinary mechanic—" "I have no time for all this, Sir Knight," said the Abbot. "Be it enough to answer, that with our will we war no longer with carnal weapons. We of the spirituality will teach you of the temporality how to die in cold blood, our hands not clenched for resistance but folded for prayer, our minds not filled with jealous hatred, but with Christian meekness and forgiveness, our ears not deafened, nor our senses confused by the sound of clamorous instruments of war, but on the contrary, our voices composed to Hallelujah, Kyrie eleison, and Salve Regina, and our blood temperate and cold as those who think upon reconciling themselves with God, not of avenging themselves of their fellow mortals." "Lord Abbot," said Sir Piercie, "this is nothing to the fate of my Molinara, whom I beseech you to observe I will not abandon, while golden hilt and steel blade bide together on my falchion. I commanded her not to follow us to the field, and yet methought I saw her in her page's attire amongst the rear of the combatants." "You must seek elsewhere for the person in whose fate you are so deeply interested," said the Abbot, "and at present I will pray of your knighthood to inquire concerning her at the church, in which all our more defenceless vassals have taken refuge. It is my advice to you, that you also abide by the horns of the altar, and Sir Piercie Shafton," he added, "be of one thing secure, that if you come to harm, it will involve the whole of this brotherhood. For never, I trust, will the meanest of us buy safety at the expense of surrendering a friend or a guest. Leave us, my son, and may God be your aid." When Sir Piercie Shafton had departed, and the Abbot was about to betake himself to his own cell, he was surprised by an unknown person anxiously requiring a conference, who, being admitted, proved to be no other than Henry Warden. The Abbot started as he entered, and exclaimed angrily, "Ha! Are the few hours that fate allows him who may last wear the mitre of this house not to be excused from the intrusion of heresy?" "Dost thou come," he said, "to enjoy the hopes which Fate holds out to thy demented and accursed sect, to see the bosom of destruction sweep away the pride of old religion, to deface our shrines, to mutilate and lay waste the bodies of our benefactors, as well as their sepulchres, to destroy the pinnacles and carved work of God's house, and our ladies?" "Peace, William Allen," said the Protestant preacher, with dignified composure. "For none of these purposes do I come. I would have these stately shrines deprived of the idols which, no longer simply regarded as the effigies of the good and of the wise, have become the objects of foul idolatry. I would otherwise have its ornaments subsist, unless as they are, or may be, a snare to the souls of men. And especially do I condemn those ravages which have been made by the heady fury of the people, stung into zeal against will worship by bloody persecution. Against such wanton devastations I lift my testimony." "Idle distinguisher that thou art," said the Abbot Eustace, interrupting him, "what signifies the pretext under which thou dost despoil the house of God? And why at this present emergence wilt thou insult the master of it by thy ill-omened presence?" "Thou art unjust, William Allen," said Warden, "but I am not the less settled in my resolution. Thou hast protected me some time since at the hazard of thy rank, and what I know thou holdest still dearer, at the risk of my reputation with thine own sect. Our party is now uppermost, and believe me, I have come down the valley, in which thou didst quarter me for sequestrian's sake, simply with the wish to keep my engagements to thee." "Ay," answered the Abbot, "and it may be that my listening to that worldly and infirm compassion which pleaded with me for thy life, is now avenged by this impending judgment. Heaven hath smitten, it may be, the erring shepherd, and scattered the flock." "Think better of the divine judgments," said Warden. "Not for thy sins, which are those of thy blended education and circumstances, not for thine own sins, William Allen, art thou stricken, but for the accumulated guilt which thy misnamed church hath accumulated on her head, and those of her votaries, by the errors and corruption of ages." "Now, by my sure belief in the Rock of Peter," said the Abbot, "thou dost rekindle the last spark of human indignation for which my bosom has fuel. I thought I might not again have felt the impulse of earthly passion, and it is thy voice which once more calls me to the expression of human anger. Yes, it is thy voice that comest to insult me in my hour of sorrow with these blasphemous accusations of that church which hath kept the light of Christianity alive from the times of the apostles till now." "From the times of the apostles?" said the preacher eagerly. "Negatur, guilielme, Allen. The primitive church differed as much from that of Rome as did light from darkness, which, did time permit, I should speedily prove. And worst dost thou judge in saying I come to insult thee in thy hour of affliction, being here, God wot, with the Christian wish of fulfilling an engagement I had made to my host, and of rendering myself to thy will while it had yet power to exercise aught upon me, and if it might so be, to mitigate in thy behalf at the rage of the victors whom God hath sent as a scourge to thy obstinacy." "I will none of thy intercession," said the Abbot sternly. "The dignity to which the Church has exalted me never should have swelled my bosom more proudly in the time of the highest prosperity than it doth at this crisis. I ask nothing of thee, but the assurance that my lenity to thee hath been the means of perverting no soul to Satan, that I have not given to the wolf any of the stray lambs whom the great Shepherd of souls had entrusted to my charge." "William Allen," answered the Protestant, "I will be sincere with thee. What I promised I have kept. I have withheld my voice from speaking even good things. but it has pleased heaven to call the maiden Mary Avenel to a better sense of faith than thou and all the disciples of Rome can teach. Her I have aided with my humble power. I have extricated her from the machinations of evil spirits to which she and her house were exposed during the blindness of their Romish superstition. And praise be to my master, I have not reason to fear she will again be caught in thy snares." "Wretched man," said the Abbot, unable to suppress his rising indignation, "is it to the Abbot of St. Mary's that you boast having misled the soul of a dweller in Our Lady's halidome into the paths of foul error and damning heresy? Thou dost urge me, Wellwood, beyond what it becomes me to bear, and movest me to employ the few moments of power I may yet possess, in removing from the face of the earth one whose qualities, given by God, have been so utterly perverted as thine to the service of Satan." "Do thy pleasure," said the preacher. "Thy vain wrath shall not prevent my doing my duty to advantage thee, where it may be done without neglecting my higher call. I go to the Earl of Murray." Their conference, which was advancing fast into bitter disputation, was here interrupted by the deep and sullen toll of the largest and heaviest bell of the convent, a sound famous in the chronicles of the community, for dispelling tempests and putting to flight demons, but which now only announced danger, without affording any means of warding against it. Hastily repeating his orders, that all the brethren should attend in the choir, arrayed for solemn procession, the Abbot ascended to the battlements of the lofty monastery, by his own private staircase, and there met the sacristan, who had been in the act of directing the tolling of the huge bell, which fell under his charge. "It is the last time I shall discharge mine office, most venerable father and lord," said he to the Abbot, "for yonder come the Philistines. But I would not that the large bell of St. Mary's should sound for the last time, otherwise than in true and full tone. I have been a sinful man for one of our holy profession," added he, looking upward, "yet may I presume to say, not a bell hath sounded out of tune from the tower of the house, while Father Philip had the superintendence of the chime and the belfry." The Abbot, without reply, cast his eyes towards the path which, winding around the mountain, descends upon Kennaquhair, from the southeast. He beheld at a distance a cloud of dust, and heard the neighing of many horses, while the occasional sparkle of the long line of spears, as they came downwards into the valley, announced that the band came thither in arms. "Shame on my weakness," said Abbot Eustace, dashing the tears from his eyes. "My sight is too much dimmed to observe their motions. Look, my son Edward," for his favourite novice had again joined them, "and tell me what ensigns they bear." "They are Scottish men, when all is done," exclaimed Edward. "I see the white crosses. It may be the western borderers, or Ferniehirst and his clan." "Look at the banner," said the Abbot. "Tell me, what are the blazonries?" "The arms of Scotland," said Edward, "the lion and its treasure, quartered, as I think, with 3 cushions. Can it be the royal standard?" "Alas, no," said the Abbot, "it is that of the Earl of Murray. He hath assumed with his new conquest the badge of the valiant Randolph, and hath dropped from his hereditary coat the bend which indicates his own base birth. Would to God he may not have blotted it also from his memory, and aim as well at possessing the name as the power of a king." "At least, my father," said Edward, "he will secure us from the violence of the Southron." "Ay, my son, as the shepherd secures a silly lamb from the wolf, which he destines in due time to his own banquet. O, my son, evil days are on us. A breach has been made in the walls of our sanctuary. Thy brother hath fallen from the faith. Such news brought my last secret intelligence. Murray hath already spoken of rewarding his services with the hand of Mary Avenel." "Of Mary Avenel!" said the novice, tottering towards and grasping hold of one of the carved pinnacles which adorned the proud battlement. "Ay, of Mary Avenel, my son, who has also abjured the faith of her fathers. Weep not, my Edward, weep not, my beloved son, or weep for their apostasy and not for their union. Bless God, who hath called thee to himself out of the tents of wickedness. But for the grace of Our Lady and Saint Benedict, thou also hadst been a castaway." End of chapter 37, part A. Chapter 37, part B of the Monastery by Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 37, Part B. "I endeavour, my father," said Edward, "I endeavour to forget. But what I would now blot from my memory has been the thought of all my former life. Murray dare not forward a match so unequal in birth. He dares do what suits his purpose. The castle of Avenel is strong, and needs a good castellan, devoted to his service. As for the difference of their birth, he will mind it no more than he would mind defacing the natural regularity of the ground, were it necessary he should erect upon it military lines and entrenchments. But do not droop for that. Awaken thy soul within thee, my son. Think you part with a vain vision, an idle dream, nursed in solitude and inaction. I weep not, yet what am I now like to lose? Look at these towers, where saints dwelt, and where heroes have been buried. Think that I, so briefly called to preside over the pious flock, which has dwelt here since the first light of Christianity, may be this day written down the last father of this holy community? Come, let us descend, and meet our fate. I see them approach near to the village." The Abbot descended, the novice cast a glance around him. Yet the sense of the danger impending over the stately structure with which he was now united was unable to banish the recollection of Mary Avenel, his brother's bride. He pulled the cowl over his face, and followed his superior. The whole bells of the Abbey now added their peal to the death toll of the largest which had so long sounded. The monks wept and prayed as they got themselves into the order of their procession for the last time, as seemed but too probable. "It is well our Father Boniface hath retired to the inland," said Father Philip. "He could never have put over this day. It would have broken his heart." "God be with the soul of Abbot Ingelram," said old Father Nicholas. "There were no such doings in his days. They say we are to be put forth of the cloisters, and how am I to live anywhere else than where I have lived for these 70 years, I wot not. The best is, that I have not long to live anywhere." A few moments after this, the great gate of the Abbey was flung open, and the procession moved slowly forward from beneath its huge and richly adorned gateway. Cross and banner, pyx and chalice, shrines containing relics, and censers steaming with incense, preceded and were intermingled with the long and solemn array of the brotherhood, in their long black gowns and cowls, with their white scapularies hanging over them, the various officers of the convent each displaying his proper badge of office. In the centre of the procession came the Abbot, surrounded and supported by his chief assistants. He was dressed in his habit of high solemnity, and appeared as much unconcerned as if he had been taking his usual part in some ordinary ceremony. After him came the inferior persons of the convent, the novices in their albs or white dresses, and the lay brethren distinguished by their beards, which were seldom worn by the fathers, bewailing the apprehended desolation of their ancient sanctuary. They moved, however, in order, and restrained the marks of their sorrow to a low wailing sound, which rather mingled with than interrupted the measured chant of the monks. In this order the procession entered the marketplace of the village of Kennaquhair, which was then, as now, distinguished by an ancient cross of curious workmanship, the gift of some former monarch of Scotland. Close by the cross, of much greater antiquity and scarcely less honoured, was an immensely large oak tree, which perhaps had witnessed the worship of the Druids, ere the stately monastery to which it adjoined had raised its spires in honour of the Christian faith, like the bentang tree of the African villages, or the Plaistow oak mentioned in White's Natural History of Selborne. This tree was the rendezvous of the villagers, and regarded with peculiar veneration, a feeling common to most nations, and which perhaps may be traced up to the remote period when the patriarch feasted the angels under the oak at Mamre. Footnote: It is scarcely necessary to say that in Melrose, the prototype of Kennaquhair, no such oak ever existed. End footnote. The monks formed themselves each in their due place around the cross, while under the ruins of the aged tree crowded the old and the feeble, with others who felt the common alarm. When they had thus arranged themselves, there was a deep and solemn pause. The monks stilled their chant, the lay populace hushed their lamentations, and all awaited in terror and silence the arrival of those heretical forces whom they had been so long taught to regard with fear and trembling. A distant trampling was at length heard, and the glance of spears was seen to shine through the trees above the village. The sounds increased, and became more thick, one close continuous rushing sound, in which the tread of hoofs was mingled with the ringing of armour. The horsemen soon appeared at the principal entrance, which leads into the irregular square or market-place which forms the centre of the village. They entered 2 by 2, slowly, and in the greatest order. The van continued to move on, riding round the open space, until they had attained the utmost point, and then turning their horses' heads to the street, stood fast. Their companions followed in the same order, until the whole market-place was closely surrounded with soldiers, and the files who followed, making the same maneuver, formed an inner line within those who had first arrived, until the place was begirt with a quadruple file of horsemen closely drawn up. There was now a pause, of which the Abbot availed himself, by commanding the brotherhood to raise the solemn chant De Profundis Clamavi. He looked around the armed ranks, to see what impression the solemn sounds made on them. All were silent, but the brows of some had an expression of contempt, and almost all the rest bore a look of indifference. Their course had been too long decided to permit past feelings of enthusiasm to be anew awakened by a procession or by a hymn. "Their hearts are hardened," said the Abbot to himself in dejection, but not in despair. "It remains to see whether those of their leaders are equally obdurate." The leaders, in the meanwhile, were advancing slowly, and Murray, with Morton, rode in deep conversation before a chosen band of their most distinguished followers, amongst whom came Halbert Glendinning. But the preacher Henry Warden, who, upon leaving the monastery, had instantly joined them, was the only person admitted to their conference. "You are determined, then," said Morton to Murray, "to give the heiress of Avenel, with all her pretensions, to this nameless and obscure young man." "Hath not Warden told you," said Murray, "that they have been bred together, and are lovers from their youth upward?" "And that they are both," said Warden, "by means which may be almost termed miraculous, rescued from the delusions of Rome, and brought within the pale of the true Church. My residence at Glendearg hath made me well acquainted with these things. Ill would it beseem my habit and my calling to thrust myself into match-making, and giving in marriage, but worse were it in me to see your lordships do needless wrong to the feelings which are proper to our nature, and which, being indulged honestly and under the restraints of religion, become a pledge of domestic quiet here, and future happiness in a better world. I say, that you will do ill to rend those ties asunder, and to give this maiden to the kinsman of Lord Morton, though Lord Morton's kinsman he be." "These are fair reasons, my Lord of Murray," said Morton, "why you should refuse me so simple a boon as to bestow this silly damsel upon young Bennygask. Speak out plainly, my lord. Say you would rather see the castle of Avenel in the hands of one who owes his name and existence solely to your favour, than in the power of a Douglas, and of my kinsmen." "My Lord of Morton," said Murray, "I have done nothing in this matter which should aggrieve you. This young man Glendinning has done me good service, and may do me more. My promise was in some degree passed to him, and that, while Julian Avenel was alive, when aught beside the maiden's lily hand would have been hard to come by. Whereas you never thought of such an alliance for your kinsman, till you saw Julian lie dead yonder on the field, and knew his land to be a waif free to the first who could seize it. Come, come, my lord, you do less than justice to your gallant kinsman, in wishing him a bride bred up under the milk pail. For this girl is a peasant wench in all but the accident of birth. I thought you had more deep respect for the honour of the Douglases." "The honour of the Douglases is safe in my keeping," answered Morton, haughtily. "That of other ancient families may suffer as well as the name of Avenel, if rustics are to be matched with the blood of our ancient barons." "This is but idle talking," answered Lord Murray. "In times like these we must look to men and not to pedigrees. Hay was but a rustic before the battle of Lancarty. The bloody yoke actually dragged the plough ere it was emblazoned on a crest by the herald. Times of action make princes into peasants, and boors into barons. All families have sprung from one mean man, and it is well if they have never degenerated from his virtue who raised them first from obscurity. "My Lord of Murray will please to except the house of Douglas," said Morton haughtily. "Men have seen it in the tree, but never in the sapling, have seen it in the stream, but never in the fountain." [Footnote: The late excellent and laborious antiquary, Mr. George Chalmers, has rebuked the vaunt of the house of Douglas, or rather of Hume of Godscroft, their historian, but with less than his wonted accuracy. In the first volume of his Caledonia, he quotes the passage in Godscroft for the purpose of confuting it. The historian of the Douglases cries out, "We do not know them in the fountain, but in the stream, not in the root, but in the stem. For we know not which is the mean man that did rise above the vulgar." This assumption Mr. Chalmers conceives ill-timed, and alleges that if the historian had attended more to research than to declamation, he might easily have seen the first mean man of this renowned family. This he alleges to have been one Theobaldus Phlegmaticus, or Theobald the Fleming, to whom Arnold, Abbot of Kelso, between the year 1147 and 1160, granted certain lands on Douglas Water by a deed which Mr. Chalmers conceives to be the first link of the chain of title deeds to Douglasdale. Hence, he says, the family must renounce their family domain, or acknowledge this obscure Fleming as their ancestor. Theobald the Fleming, it is acknowledged, did not himself assume the name of Douglas, but, says the antiquary, his son William, who inherited his estate, called himself, and was named by others, de Douglas, and he refused to the deeds in which he is so designed. Mr. Chalmers' full argument may be found in the first volume of his Caledonia, page 579. This proposition is one which a Scotsman will admit unwillingly, and only upon undeniable testimony, and as it is liable to strong grounds of challenge, the present author, with all the respect to Mr. Chalmers which his zealous and effectual researches merit, is not unwilling to take this opportunity to state some plausible grounds for doubting that Theobaldus Phlegmaticus was either the father of the first William de Douglas, or in the slightest degree connected with the Douglas family. It must first be observed that there is no reason whatever for concluding Theobaldus Phlegmaticus to be the father of William de Douglas, except that they both held lands upon the small river of Douglas, and that there are two strong presumptions to the contrary. For first, the father being named Fleming, there seems no good reason why the son should have assumed a different designation. Secondly, there does not occur a single instance of the name of Theobald during the long line of the Douglas pedigree, an omission very unlikely to take place had the original father of the race been so called. These are secondary considerations indeed, but they are important, in so far as they exclude any support of Mr. Chalmers' system, except from the point which he has rather assumed than proved, namely, that the lands granted to Theobald the Fleming were the same which were granted to William de Douglas, and which constituted the original domain of which we find this powerful family lords. Now it happens, singularly enough, that the lands granted by the Abbot of Kelso to Theobaldus Phlegmaticus are not the same of which William de Douglas was in possession. Nay, it would appear, from comparing the charter granted to Theobaldus Phlegmaticus, that, though situated on the water of Douglas, they never made a part of the barony of that name, and therefore cannot be the same with those held by William de Douglas in the succeeding generation. But if William de Douglas did not succeed Theobaldus Phlegmaticus, there is no more reason for holding these two persons to be father and son than if they had lived in different provinces, and we are still as far from having discovered the first mean man of the Douglas family as Hume of Godscroft was in the 16th century. We leave the question to antiquaries and genealogists. In the earliest of our Scottish annals, the Black Douglas was powerful and distinguished as now. "I bend to the honours of the house of Douglas," said Murray, somewhat ironically. "I am conscious we of the royal house have little right to compete with them in dignity. What though we have worn crowns and carried sceptres for a few generations, if our genealogy moves no farther back than to the humble Alanus Dapifer?" To atone to the memory of the learned and indefatigable Chalmers for having ventured to impeach his genealogical proposition concerning the descent of the Douglases, We are bound to render him our grateful thanks for the felicitous light which he has thrown on that of the House of Stuart, still more important to Scottish history. The acute pen of Lord Hailes, which, like the spear of Ithuriel, conjured so many shadows from Scottish history, had dismissed among the rest those of Banquo and Fleance, the rejection of which fables left the illustrious family of Stuart without an ancestor beyond Walter the son of Alan, who is alluded to in the text. The researches of our late learned antiquary detected in this Walter the descendant of Alan, the son of Flaald, who obtained from William the Conqueror the castle of Oswestry in Shropshire, and was the father of an illustrious line of English nobles by his first son William, and by his second son Walter, the progenitor of the royal family of Stuart. Morton's cheek reddened as he was about to reply, but Henry Warden availed himself of the liberty which the Protestant clergy long possessed, and exerted it to interrupt a discussion which was becoming too eager and personal to be friendly. Chapter 37, Part B. Chapter 37, Part C of the Monastery by Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 37, Part C. "My lords," he said, "I must be bold in discharging the duty of my master. It is a shame and scandal to hear two nobles, whose hands have been so forward in the work of reformation, fall into discord about such vain follies as now occupy your thoughts. Bethink you how long you have thought with one mind, seen with one eye, heard with one ear, confirmed by your union the congregation of the Church, appalled by your joint authority the congregation of Antichrist, and will you now fall into discord about an old decayed castle, and a few barren hills, about the loves and likings of an humble spearman, and a damsel bred in the same obscurity, or about the still vainer questions of idle genealogy?" "The good man hath spoken right, noble Douglas," said Murray, reaching him his hand. "Our union is too essential to the good cause to be broken off upon such idle terms of dissension. I am fixed to gratify Glendinning in this matter. My promise is past. The wars in which I have had my share have made many a family miserable. I will at least try if I may not make one happy. There are maids and manors enow in Scotland. I promise you, my noble ally, that young Bennygask shall be richly wived." "My lord," said Warden, "you speak nobly, and like a Christian. Alas, this is a land of hatred and bloodshed. Let us not chase from thence the few traces that remain of gentle and domestic love. And be not too eager for wealth to thine noble kinsman, my Lord of Morton, seeing contentment in the marriage state no way depends on it." "If you allude to my family misfortune," said Morton, whose countess, wedded by him for her estate and honours, was insane in her mind, "the habit you wear, and the liberty, or rather license of your profession, protect you from my resentment." "Alas, my lord," replied Warden, "how quick and sensitive is our self-love! When pressing forward in our high calling, we point out the errors of the sovereign. Who praises our boldness more than the noble Morton? But touch we upon his own sore, which most needs lancing, and he shrinks from the faithful chirurgeon in fear and impatient anger." "Enough of this, good and reverend sir," said Murray. "You transgress the prudence yourself recommended even now. We are now close upon the village, and the proud Abbot is come forth at the head of his hive. Thou hast pleaded well for him, Warden, otherwise I had taken this occasion to pull down the nest, and chase away the rooks." "Nay, but do not so," said Warden. "This William Allan, whom they call the Abbot Eustatius, is a man whose misfortunes would more prejudice our cause than his prosperity. You cannot inflict more than he will endure. And the more that he is made to bear, the higher will be the influence of his talents and his courage. In his conventual throne he will be but coldly looked on, disliked it may be, and envied. But turn his crucifix of gold into a crucifix of wood, let him travel through the land, an oppressed and impoverished man, and his patience, his eloquence, and learning will win more hearts from the good cause than all the mitred abbots of Scotland have been able to make prey of during the last 100 years." Tush, tush, man, said Morton. The revenues of the Halidome will bring more men, spears, and horses into the field in one day than his preaching in a whole lifetime. These are not the days of Peter the Hermit, when monks could march armies from England to Jerusalem. But gold and good deeds will still do as much or more than ever. Had Julian Avenel had but a score or two more men this morning, Sir John Foster had not missed a worse welcome. I say, confiscating the monks' revenues is drawing his fang teeth. We will surely lay him under contribution, said Murray, and moreover, if he wishes to remain in his abbey, he will do well to produce Piercie Shafton. As he thus spoke, they entered the market-place, distinguished by their complete armour and their lofty plumes, as well as by the number of followers bearing their colours and badges. Both these powerful nobles, but more especially Murray, so nearly allied to the crown, had at that time a retinue and household not much inferior to that of Scottish royalty. As they advanced into the market-place, a pursuivant, pressing forward from their train, addressed the monks in these words: The Abbot of St. Mary's is commanded to appear before the Earl of Murray. The Abbot of St. Mary's, said Eustace, is in the patrimony of his convent, superior to every temporal lord. Let the Earl of Murray, if he seeks him, come himself to his presence. On receiving this answer, Murray smiled scornfully, and dismounting from his lofty saddle, he advanced, accompanied by Morton, and followed by others, to the body of monks assembled around the cross. There was an appearance of shrinking among them at the approach of the heretic lord, so dreaded and so powerful. But the abbot, casting on them a glance of rebuke and encouragement, stepped forth from their ranks, like a courageous leader, when he sees that his personal valour must be displayed to revive the drooping courage of his followers. Lord James Stewart, he said, or Earl of Murray, if that be thy title, I, Eustatius, Abbot of St. Mary's, demand by what right you have filled our peaceful village, and surrounded our brethren, with these bands of armed men. If hospitality is sought, we have never refused it to courteous asking. If violence be meant against peaceful churchmen, let us know at once the pretext and the object. Sir Abbot, said Murray, your language would better have become another age, and a presence inferior to ours. We come not here to reply to your interrogations, but to demand of you why you have broken the peace, collecting your vassals in arms, and convocating the Queen's lieges, whereby many men have been slain, and much trouble, perchance breach of amity with England, is likely to arise. Lupus in fabula, answered the abbot scornfully. The wolf accused the sheep of muddying the stream when he drank in it above her, but it served as a pretext for devouring her. Convocate the Queen's lieges. I did so to defend the Queen's land against foreigners. I did but my duty, and I regret I had not the means to do it more effectually. And was it also a part of your duty to receive and harbour the Queen of England's rebel and traitor, and to inflame a war betwixt England and Scotland? Said Murray. In my younger days, my lord, answered the abbot with the same intrepidity, a war with England was no such dreaded matter, and not merely a mitred abbot, bound by his rule to show hospitality and afford sanctuary to all, but the poorest Scottish peasant would have been ashamed to have pleaded fear of England as the reason for shutting his door against a persecuted exile. But in those olden days, the English seldom saw the face of a Scottish nobleman, save through the bars of his visor. Monk, said the Earl of Morton sternly, this insolence will little avail thee. The days are gone by when Rome's priests were permitted to brave noblemen with impunity. Give us up this Piercie Shafton, or by my father's crest I will set thy abbey in a bright flame. And if thou dost, Lord of Morton, its ruins will tumble above the tombs of thine own ancestors. Be the issue as God wills, the Abbot of St. Mary's gives up no one whom he hath promised to protect. Abbot, said Murray, bethink thee ere we are driven to deal roughly, the hands of these men, he said, pointing to the soldiers, will make wild work among the shrines and cells, if we are compelled to undertake a search for this Englishman. Ye shall not need, said a voice from the crowd, and advancing gracefully before the earls, the Euphuist flung from him the mantle in which he was muffled. "Via the cloud that shadowed Shafton," said he, "behold, my lords, the Knight of Wilverton, who spares you the guilt of violence and sacrilege." "I protest before God and man against any infraction of the privileges of this house," said the Abbot, "by an attempt to impose violent hands upon the person of this noble knight. If there be yet spirit in a Scottish Parliament, we will make you hear of this elsewhere, my lords." "Spare your threats," said Murray. "It may be, my purpose with Sir Piercie Shafton is not such as thou dost suppose. Attach him, pursuivant, as our prisoner, rescue or no rescue." "I yield myself," said the Euphuist, "reserving my right to defy my Lord of Murray and my Lord of Morton to single duel, even as one gentleman may demand satisfaction of another." "You shall not want those who will answer your challenge, Sir Knight," replied Morton, "without aspiring to men above thine own degree." "And where am I to find these superlative champions," said the English knight, "whose blood runs more pure than that of Piercie Shafton?" "Here is a flight for you, my lord," said Murray. "As ever was flown by a wild goose," said Stawarth Bolton, who had now approached to the front of the party. "Who dared to say that word?" said the Euphuist, his face crimson with rage. "Tut, man," said Bolton, "make the best of it. Thy mother's father was but a tailor, old Overstitch of Holderness. Why, what, because thou art a misproud bird, and despiseth thine own natural lineage, and rufflest in unpaid silks and velvets, and keepest company with gallants and cutters, must we lose our memory for that? Thy mother, Moll Overstitch, was the prettiest wench in those parts. She was wedded by wild Shafton of Wilverton, who men say was akin to the Piercie on the wrong side of the blanket." "Help the knight to some strong waters," said Morton. "He hath fallen from such a height that he is stunned with the tumble." In fact, Sir Piercie Shafton looked like a man stricken by a thunderbolt, while, notwithstanding the seriousness of the scene hitherto, no one of those present, not even the Abbot himself, could refrain from laughing at the rueful and mortified expression of his face. "Laugh on," he said at length, "laugh on, my masters," shrugging his shoulders. "It is not for me to be offended. Yet would I know full fain from that squire who was laughing with the loudest, how he had discovered this unhappy blot in an otherwise spotless lineage, and for what purpose he hath made it known." "I make it known!" said Halbert Glendinning in astonishment, for to him this pathetic appeal was made. "I never heard the thing till this moment." [Footnote: The contrivance of provoking the irritable vanity of Sir Piercie Shafton, by presenting him with a bodkin indicative of his descent from a tailor, is borrowed from a German romance by the celebrated Tieck, called Das Peter Manchem, in other words, the Dwarf Peter. The being who gives name to the tale is the Burggeist or castle spectre of a German family, whom he aids with his counsel as he defends their castle by his supernatural power. But the Dwarf Peter is so unfortunate an adviser, that all his counsels, though producing success in the immediate results, are in the issue attended with mishap and with guilt. The youthful baron, the owner of the haunted castle, falls in love with a maiden, the daughter of a neighbouring count, a man of great pride, who refuses him the hand of the young lady, on account of his own superiority of descent. The lover, repulsed and affronted, returns to take counsel with the Dwarf Peter how he may silence the count, and obtain the victory of the argument, the next time they enter on the topic of pedigree. The dwarf gives his patron or pupil a horseshoe, instructing him to give it to the count when he is next giving himself superior airs on the subject of his family. It has the effect accordingly. The count, understanding it as an allusion to a misalliance of one of his ancestors with the daughter of a blacksmith, is thrown into a dreadful passion with the young lover, the consequences of which are the seduction of the young lady and the slaughter of her father. If we suppose the dwarf to represent the corrupt part of human nature, that law in our members which wars against the law of our minds, the work forms an ingenious allegory. Why, did not that old rude soldier learn it from thee? Said the knight in increasing amazement. Not I, by heaven, said Bolton. I never saw the youth in my life before. But you have seen him ere now, my worthy master, said Dame Glendinning, bursting in her turn from the crowd. My son, This is Stawarth Bolton, he to whom we owe life, and the means of preserving it, if he be a prisoner, as seems most likely. Use thine interest with these noble lords to be kind to the widow's friend." "What, my Dame of the Glen," said Bolton, "thy brow is more withered, as well as mine, since we met last, but thy tongue holds the touch better than my arm. This boy of thine gave me the foil so sorely this morning. The brown varlet has turned as stout a trooper as I prophesied. And where is Whitehead?" "Alas," said the mother, looking down, "Edward has taken orders, and become a monk of this abbey." "A monk and a soldier! Evil trades both, my good dame. Better have made one a good master fashioner, like old Overstitch of Holderness. I sighed when I envied you the two bonny children, but I sigh not now to call either the monk or the soldier mine own. The soldier dies in the field, the monk scarce lives in the cloister." "My dearest mother," said Halbert, "where is Edward? Can I not speak with him?" "He has just left us for the present," said Father Philip, "upon a message from the Lord Abbot." "And Mary, my dearest mother," said Halbert. Mary Avenel was not far distant, and the three were soon withdrawn from the crowd to hear and relate their various chances of fortune. While the subordinate personages thus disposed of themselves, the Abbot held serious discussion with the two earls, and, partly yielding to their demands, partly defending himself with skill and eloquence, was enabled to make a composition for his convent, which left it provisionally in no worse situation than before. The earls were the more reluctant to drive matters to extremity, since he protested that if urged beyond what his conscience would comply with, he would throw the whole lands of the monastery into the Queen of Scotland's hands, to be disposed of at her pleasure. This would not have answered the views of the earls, who were contented for the time with a moderate sacrifice of money and lands. Matters being so far settled, the Abbot became anxious for the fate of Sir Piercie Shafton, and implored mercy in his behalf. "He is a coxcomb," he said, "my lords, but he is a generous, though a vain fool. And it is my firm belief you have this day done him more pain than if you had run a poniard into him." "Run a needle into him, you mean, Abbot," said the Earl of Morton. "By mine honour, I thought this grandson of a fashioner of doublets was descended from a crowned head at least." "I hold with the Abbot," said Murray. "There were little honour in surrendering him to Elizabeth, but he shall be sent where he can do her no injury. Our pursuivant and Bolton shall escort him to Dunbar, and ship him off for Flanders. But soft, here he comes, and leading a female, as I think." "Lords and others," said the English knight with great solemnity, "make way for the Lady of Piercie Shafton. A secret which I listed not to make known till fate, which hath betrayed what I vainly strove to conceal, makes me less desirous to hide that which I now announce to you." "It is Mysie Happer, the miller's daughter, on my life," said Tib Tacket. "I thought the pride of these Piercies would have a fa." "It is indeed the lovely Mysinda," said the knight, "whose merits towards her devoted servant deserved higher rank than he had to bestow." "I suspect, though," said Murray, "that we should not have heard of the miller's daughter being made a lady, had not the knight proved to be the grandson of a tailor." "My lord," said Piercie Shafton, "it is poor valour to strike him that cannot smite again, and I hope you will consider what is due a prisoner by the law of arms, and say nothing more on this odious subject. When I am once more mine own man, I will find a new road to dignity." "Shape one, I presume," said the Earl of Morton. "Nay, Douglas, you will drive him mad," said Murray. "Besides, we have other matter in hand. I must see Warden wed Glendinning with Mary Avenel, and put him in possession of his wife's castle without delay. It will be best done ere our forces leave these parts." "And I," said the miller, "have the like grist to grind, for I hope some one of the good fathers will wed my wench with her gay bridegroom." "It needs not," said Shafton. "The ceremonial hath been solemnly performed." "It will not be the worse of another bolting," said the miller. "It is always best to be sure, as I say when I chance to take multure twice from the same meal sack." "Stave the miller off him," said Murray, "or he will worry him dead. The Abbot, my lord, offers us the hospitality of the convent. I move we should repair hither, Sir Piercie and all of us. I must learn to know the Maid of Avenel. To-morrow I must act as her father. All Scotland shall see how Murray can reward a faithful servant." Mary Avenel and her lover avoided meeting the Abbot, and took up their temporary abode in a house of the village, where next day their hands were united by the Protestant preacher in presence of the two earls. On the same day, Sir Piercie Shafton and his bride departed, under an escort which was to conduct him to the seaside, and see him embark for the Low Countries. Early on the following morning the bands of the earls were under march to the castle of Avenel, to invest the young bridegroom with the property of his wife, which was surrendered to them without opposition. But not without those omens which seemed to mark every remarkable event which befell the fated family, did Mary take possession of the ancient castle of her forefathers. The same warlike form which had appeared more than once at Glendearg was seen by Tib Tacket and Martin, who returned with their young mistress to partake her altered fortunes. It glided before the cavalcade as they advanced upon the long causeway, paused at each drawbridge, and flourished its hand as in triumph, as it disappeared under the gloomy archway, which was surmounted by the insignia of the House of Avenel. The two trusty servants made their vision only known to Dame Glendinning, who, with much pride of heart, had accompanied her son to see him take his rank among the barons of the land. "O my dear Baron," she exclaimed, when she heard the tale, "the castle is a grand place to be sure, but I wish ye dinna desire to be back in the quiet braes of Glendearg before the play be played out." But this natural reflection, springing from maternal anxiety, was soon forgotten amid the busy and pleasing task of examining and admiring the new habitation of her son. While these affairs were passing, Edward had hidden himself and his sorrows in the paternal tower of Glendearg, where every object was full of matter for bitter reflection. The Abbot's kindness had dispatched him thither upon pretence of placing some papers belonging to the Abbey in safety and secrecy, but in reality to prevent his witnessing the triumph of his brother. Through the deserted apartments, the scene of so many bitter reflections, the unhappy youth stalked like a discontented ghost, conjuring up around him at every step new subjects for sorrow and for self-torment. Impatient at length of the state of irritation and agonized recollection in which he found himself, he rushed out and walked hastily up the glen, as if to shake off the load which hung upon his mind. The sun was setting when he reached the entrance of Corri nan Shian, and the recollection of what he had seen when he last visited that haunted ravine burst upon his mind. He was in a humour, however, rather to seek out danger than to avoid it. "I will face this mystic being," he said. "She foretold the fate which has wrapped me in this dress. I will know whether she has aught else to tell me of a life which cannot be but miserable." He failed not to see the White Spirit seated by her accustomed haunt, and singing in her usual low and sweet tone. While she sung, she seemed to look with sorrow on her golden zone, which was now diminished to the fineness of a silken thread. "Fare thee well, thou holly green, Thou shalt seldom now be seen, With all thy glittering garlands bending, As to greet my slow descending, Startling the bewildered hind, Who sees thee wave without a wind. Farewell, fountain! Now not long shalt thou murmur to my song, While thy crystal bubbles glancing Keep the time in mystic dancing, Rise and swell, are burst and lost, Like mortal schemes by fortune crossed. The knot of fate at length is tied, The churl is lord, the maid is bride. Vainly did my magic sleight Send the lover from her sight. Wither bush and perish well, Fallen is lofty Avenel. The vision seemed to weep while she sung, and the words impressed on Edward a melancholy belief that the alliance of Mary with his brother might be fatal to them both. Here terminates the first part of the Benedictine's manuscript. I have in vain endeavoured to ascertain the precise period of the story, as the dates cannot be exactly reconciled with those of the most accredited histories. But it is astonishing how careless the writers of Utopia are upon these important subjects. I observe that the learned Mr. Lawrence Templeton, in his late publication entitled Ivanhoe, has not only blessed the bed of Edward the Confessor with an offspring unknown to history, with sundry other solecisms of the same kind, but has invented the order of nature, and feasted his swine with acorns in the midst of summer. All that can be alleged by the warmest admirer of this author amounts to this: that the circumstances objected to are just as true as the rest of the story, which appears to me, more especially in the matter of the acorns, to be a very imperfect defence, and that the author will do well to profit by Captain Absolute's advice to his servant, and never tell him more lies than are indispensably necessary. End of chapter 37, part C. And End of the Monastery, by Walter Scott.